Part 18. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Xiao. Chapter 179. Su Tong didn't expect that his mistress would kill her whenever she asked, and she would fall out faster than flipping through a book. He cursed in his heart that a woman's face would change on a June day. I saw the embroidered shoes rising in the wind, and when they landed on my head, they were already like a hill covering my head. The big head raised its arms high, and suddenly the dense tentacles intertwined together, turning into a big umbrella and thrusting it over the head, trying to use the paper body to block the embroidered shoe. However, what Su Tong never expected was that the embroidered shoes, which he thought were evenly matched, were crushed and exploded by a majestic force the moment they fell. Snapped. A strong wind blew, and Su Tong was knocked out on the spot. When he looked again, he found that half of the fat body had been trampled to pieces. The summoned creature is damaged, please summon it again within 24 hours. Hiss. Looking at the torn up big fat, Su Tong's lips twitched and he couldn't help but take a breath of air. He didn't know whether it was because he felt sorry for Big Fat, or because of the script, or because he was surprised that Big Fat was killed instantly. A laughter like silver bells came from the side. Master's wife, these shoes grow long when exposed to the wind, but they can step on them without sinking. You are just a little paper man, and you still think you can hold on? I haven't trampled you to death even if you're lucky. As the master's wife said this, she raised her hand and grabbed him. Her slender fingers appeared in front of Su Tong in the next second and grabbed his head. Of course he would not sit still and wait for death. Looking at the thin white palms in front of him, his face turned cold, and he raised his arms brazenly, activating the abilities of embers and demonic power at the same time. Suddenly, two strangely different yet similar dark flames burst out from his palm. He waved his hand and clapped it with the master's beautiful hand. Snapped. When these palms were slapped together, a layer of light blue fire suddenly rippled in the air. The strange flames spread out in the air like a drop of ink falling into the basin, as if there was a man wearing black clothes. The dancer in the skirt dances in the air. It was also the first time that Su Tong activated and used the abilities of two prop cards at the same time. In an instant, the fire like water smoke seemed to freeze the void for a moment. Just after this short moment, brilliant fire suddenly exploded in front of him. The extremely overbearing explosion was like two incompatible forces, as if it was going to tear apart everything in front of him. Snort. This violent force caught the master's wife off guard. Her red phoenix eyes were slightly raised, showing a slightly solemn look. She squeezed them with her fingers. Su Tong immediately felt that the brilliant fire in front of him seemed to be wiped out in an instant. Little guy, let me show you what other skills you have, she sat in mid-air under the roof beam, looking down at Su Tong. The ability displayed by this little guy made her more and more curious. It seemed that Old Man Song was really lucky to find such an apprentice. Seeing that the big fat man was killed with one move, and the power of his twin fires was easily wiped out, Su Tong finally realized how terrifying his master's wife was. Who would have thought that a paper man could have such terrifying power? He could kill ghosts, easily suppress the profound realm of Buddhism with just one shoe, and even destroy Big Fatty with ease, leaving him powerless to fight back. Thinking of this, Su Tong clenched his hands tightly into fists, and his eyes became hot when he looked at his wife. In addition to players, there are too many things in this world that he didn't expect. Even the master's wife is full of secrets that people can't understand. Not only did this not make Su Tong feel scared, but he felt extremely excited and yearning in his heart. After hearing what his wife said, he raised his eyebrows slightly, raised his head and looked at his wife and said, "Master, please forgive me for being rude." Seeing that Su Tong was really serious, the mistress smiled disdainfully and didn't take him seriously at all. However, the next second, the smile on her face suddenly froze, her eyes widened as she looked at the bell on Su Tong's hand, and screamed, "Why do you have this thing?" As he spoke, he actually jumped up and appeared in front of Su Tong like lightning. He raised his slender fingers as if to seal off the void, causing the speed of time around him to slow down a lot. Ding! But even so, she still took a step slower, and an ethereal bell sound suddenly echoed on Su Tong's hand. The ancient bell has a picture of hell embossed on it. This is one of the 8 gates and 32 treasures, the evil bell, and it is also an inherited token of the paper-maker lineage. There are only 4 authentic lineages of the paper-making people, among which the Wang families is the direct line. This thing should be in the hands of the Wang family, but I don't want it to appear in Su Tong's hands. Now, even this powerful master's wife suddenly suffered a big loss. The sound of the bell ringed in the air, and as Su Tong continued to shake, the sound became more and more harsh, and even the wife couldn't help but snort, and the figure kept retreating until she was hiding on the beam, holding her fingers tightly on the beam. That's why he didn't fall from above. This ringing sound is the accompanying skill of the demonic bell, the demonic sound. The sound of ghosts. Spending 5 script points, you can use the demonic bell to make a violent sound and produce a mental attack on targets within 15 meters. Causes huge damage to ghost-like creatures. There is a 20% chance that the ghost will be temporarily unable to move. There is a 10% chance that the ghost will be driven away. Seeing this, Su Tong secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, no matter how strong the master's wife was, she was still a paper doll, and she would eventually give in front of the nemesis demon bell. You are actually from the Wang family. The master's wife also recognizes the demonic bell. After all, it is a token of the 7 sections. However, the Wang family has disappeared for many years, and the master's wife was a little surprised that this thing would actually fall into his hands. Su Tong didn't have any excuse for this. He raised the bell in his hand and pointed it at the master's wife to activate the demonic sound again. Ding! Now the master's wife's face finally looked ugly, and the ringing sound no less than that of Huang Zongdalu came into the ears, which made the master's eardrums buzz and hurt. His eyes suddenly turned red. You brat, watch me skin you. Enough. At this time, Mr. Song's voice suddenly came from outside the door. Su Tong looked back and saw that Mr. Song had come back without knowing when. He quickly put away the bell on his hand and ran to Mr. Song with a sad face. Shouted, "Master, you are back." As soon as I entered the door, I saw the master's wife beating the monk. I advised the master's wife to stop, but the master's wife actually wanted to kill me to silence me. The evildoer complains first, and Su Tong certainly understands this principle. I really wait for the master's wife to speak. If the confusion of right and wrong arises, maybe Mr. Song will give him a way to eliminate relatives and clean up the family. Mr. Song glanced at Monk Miaojing, who was already vomiting blood on the ground, and couldn't help but frown. Looking up at the woman in front of him, his expression suddenly became complicated. He saw Mr. Song taking out a silver box from his arms. This box was the soul core of Master Niang and the others. As long as Mr. Song squeezes them gently, the paper figures in front of him will be wiped out in an instant. But Mr. Song put the silver box on the table. "Take your things and let's go." The mistress was startled, staring blankly at the silver box on the table, her expression flickering in and out, and suddenly she began to laugh. Her laughter was loud at first, but her voice became deeper and deeper as she laughed. He, we have been guarding you for so many years, and now you are going to drive us away." Mr. Song's face changed slightly and he shook his head. "That's not what I meant." The mistress laughed coldly. "Haven't you heard that saying? It's easy to ask a god but hard to send him away. If you want us to leave, we can leave. Give me this boy, and I will take him with me." The master's wife pointed her finger at Su Tong's head. "Don't." Su Tong crossed his arms on his chest. "Master wife, how about you take this monk away? He's a little old, but he can still be used if he makes do." Mr. Song shook his head and said nothing. He just took out a small ceramic jar from his sleeve and put it on the table. Seeing this ceramic jar, the master's wife's eyes suddenly became hot. I know that you have been guarding me for so long, and I have nothing to repay you. I will give you this. From now on, we will not owe each other anything. When he said the last few words, Su Tong stood next to Mr. Song and clearly felt that Mr. Song's hands were shaking slightly. It seems that even if it is a figure, it will still have emotions over time. It's just that sometimes, people can't help but make multiple choices. Looking at the ceramic jar, the mistress almost didn't hesitate, stretched out her hand to hold it in her hand, carefully caressed the ceramic jar with her slender fingers, and at the same time did not forget to pick up their soul boxes on the table and put them in her hands. Superior. Okay. Okay, Song Ching, please remember. You gave me this thing today on your own initiative. Don't regret it in the future. Also, this brat next to you is not a good thing. You'd better be careful. Mr. Song lowered his head and said nothing, sitting on the chair as if he was asleep. Seeing the teacher's wife stamping her feet, two dolls rolled over from the corner, landed at her feet, and then jumped. Su Tong felt his eyes flashing. When he opened his eyes again, he saw that on the chair in front of him, the master's wife had returned to the appearance of a paper doll. But when he took a closer look, he felt that the master's wife didn't seem to have the same spirituality as before. After taking another look, I saw clearly that the pupils in the master's eyes had disappeared. You didn't give that thing to this evil ghost, did you? Miao Jing on the ground opened her eyes at some point and asked. In fact, he was not seriously injured, he was just pretending to be unconscious so as to look for a suitable opportunity. As a result, when he saw Mr. Song actually taking out such important things after he came back, Miao Jing felt anxious and jealous. It's a pity that Mr. Song always lowered his head and smoked, refusing to pay attention to him. Seeing this wonderful scene, he became even more annoyed and got up from the ground. But, Mr. Shui spent a lot of effort to bring order to the chaos. I didn't expect that his apprentice would give away the things so easily. Get out. Say goodbye. After saying that, Miao Jing was about to walk out the door with a quick stride. Su Tong raised his eyebrows slightly, turned around calmly, and picked up the stick on the table. Just when he was about to take action, his wrists suddenly tightened, and Mr. Song lowered his head and shook it a few times, indicating that he could not take action. As he spoke, he pulled hard and pulled him back to the chair. Let him go. If you sow the cause today, there will be results in the future. Master, what did you bring out for my wife? Can you make them all have such exaggerated expressions? Su Tong helped the old man sit back on the more comfortable rocking chair at the side, and asked curiously in his heart. Listening to the meaning of Miao Jing's words, and the satisfied look on his wife's face when she left, he intuitively told him that this thing must not be simple. I saw that Mr. Song was not in a hurry. He was smoking the pipe slowly. He did not answer Su Tong's words, but laughed and cursed, "You brat, you have stiff wings, but you still hide secrets from me." Mr. Song grinned, showing a mouthful of yellow teeth, but it made people feel extremely friendly. He slowly took a puff of tobacco, and as the smoke slowly floated up, he answered Su Tong's question just now. That was the thing that caused those evil cultists to go crazy back then. Your master Shuigui also went through a lot of hard work to seal this thing. I don't know exactly what is inside. It turns out that the reason why Mr. Song went out so early was to obtain the soul core, and on the other hand, he wanted to take out this treasure that had been hidden for many years. Su Tong was shocked. He had discussed this matter with Gao Zhou at the exhibition before. According to Gao Zhou, these evil ways suddenly appeared in 1986, but few people know the specific reasons. And his master Shuigui is the core figure in this storm. Could it be that those evil ways were all directed at the small ceramic bottle just now? Now he understood why Miao Jing had such a ferocious expression just now. This thing can make those evil people so crazy, so it must be a rare treasure. My wife actually got this thing, she might cause big problems in the future. What, you want to chase me too? Mr. Song seemed to have read through his mind and said with a smile. No. I just feel a little pity. Mr. Song pulled him and motioned for him to sit down and whispered, actually, I know about your apprenticeship in art. I knew it when you came in holding the paper flowers. But it doesn't matter, I just didn't expect it. You kid is pretty good at hiding. As he spoke, Mr. Song suddenly took out another square box from his sleeve and threw it to him. What's this? Looking at the boxy box, Su Tong looked strange. As soon as he touched the box with his hand, he immediately felt like an electric shock. Especially the source in his prop book seemed to be burning, bursting out with dazzling light. This is what your master got from the evil way during the battle at Buman Mountain. Mr. Song knocked on the lid and said with a smile. Ah. Then what my wife just took away is. He, Mr. Song pretended to be sophisticated, took a sip from his pipe and pot, and said with an excited smile, what she took away was a piece of my shit. Sorry, I have been recuperating recently, so I will always update. Please wait, and I will resume normal updates after I recover. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 180. Master. You want my wife to take the blame for me. Su Tong was so smart that he immediately understood Mr. Song's intention after hearing this. The master's wife ran away with her things, and the master deliberately spared Miao Jing. Didn't this mean that the lice on the monk's head were clearly visible? I'm afraid that it won't be long before the news that my master's wife absconded with the treasure will be announced to the public. By that time, I'm afraid the mistress's life will be difficult. When he thought of this, the bridge of his nose felt sore for a moment, and his mouth became a little bitter. After all, they have been a couple for so many years, and he has only been here for a long time. But he didn't expect that the master would divert the trouble to the east in the end. Not only did he save his wife, but he also protected himself. This kindness made his eloquent little mouth suddenly become clumsy. Mr. Song smoked the pipe and pot in his hand and patted Su Tong's arm gently with one hand. When your master died, all kinds of monsters and ghosts came to our house. There were ghosts, officials, and thieves. It was so lively. When Shui Gui died suddenly, many people came to test Mr. Song's depth under the guise of paying homage. From the governor of a province to the small director of the sub-district office. There are big thieves in the green forest, and there are imps with evil ways. The 3 religions and 9 schools were just watching, and even when he was still vigiling in the middle of the night, there was already a fight outside the door. That period of time was so difficult, and I would often wake up in the middle of the night, and I could feel someone watching me when I walked on the road. Occasionally, if you are not careful, you will even be ambushed, and the beating will be mild. In serious cases, you will almost have your throat cut off. My master left in a hurry back then and couldn't save me for a while, which caused me a lot of suffering. In the end, I didn't dare to take this thing out. Mr. Song pointed to the box in Su Tong's hand. The contents in this box were extraordinary. When Shui Gui stayed, he might not have thought of giving it to Mr. Song. But this thing is too eye-catching, and I have never found a suitable opportunity. Then Shui Gui fell into a conspiracy. Mr. Song has been even more cautious in his life, and he has endured many hardships before he gradually recovered, but by the time I get over it, I will be old. Coupled with the reform and opening up, people's lives began to flourish again, and Mr. Song was too lazy to care about these things anymore and lived a down-to-earth life. But he knew in his heart that there were still people thinking about the contents of this box. If these people knew that they had an apprentice, they would never leave the mountain again. Therefore, Mr. Song half squinted his eyes, held Su Tong's hand tightly and said, "Son, Master knows that you have the ability, but a good tiger cannot fight against a pack of wolves. Master Lu has already helped you break through, and the rest depends on how you do it." Gone. But Master's wife sighed. Thinking of Master's wife's methods, Su Tong was still a little wary. If he hadn't happened to have the magic bell to restrain her, he might have suffered a big loss just now. But with the demon bell alone, I am not sure that I can really agree to her, unless I activate the two abilities of the Dark Lord and the advent of the Demon King, but the cost of doing so is too high, and the gain is not worth the loss. Don't worry, she can't open the porcelain jar. Mr. Song was very confident about the seal on the porcelain jar. The seal on it was not from their Pingman lineage, but the inspiration he found in an old book after reading a lot of books. After the seal is sealed, unless there is a correct method, if you want to break the seal, you can only break it violently, but the things inside are so precious, who would take such a big risk to violently remove it? So Mr. Song estimated that his seal could last for at least a year and a half. By then, when people found out that they had been deceived, his good disciple would have already run away. Under the guidance of Mr. Song, Su Tong pulled the paper figures to the yard outside the door and took them apart. By the way, it was just another lesson for him. Every time he demolished a place, Mr. Song inevitably explained the unknown tricks carefully. Without the body of the paper man, the master wife will have to hide for a while and slowly look for opportunities. In the end, whether it is to borrow the corpse to bring back the soul, or to seize the soul from the body, it is not something that can be completed in a short time. It just happened that this period of time allowed the master and apprentice to calm down and fill in the many vacancies after getting started. In the blink of an eye, a few days passed, and the master and apprentice gradually found their way. One taught step by step, and the other studied seriously. After a few days, under the guidance of Mr. Song, Su Tong's mountain buckle gradually began to improve. Bowing within 10 meters is enough to hurt someone's spirit. Even if the other party's spiritual power is obviously higher than your own, they are still capable of fighting. But that alone was not enough. Mr. Song specially took him to see off several elderly people around the old city. When Su Tong asked, he found out that the elderly people in the old city had made an agreement with Mr. Song long ago. In addition to the paper figures to see him off, Mr. Song must also be responsible for the process of handling things at home after his death. Therefore, in the past few days, Su Tong and Mr. Song had to have a banquet every day, and his thin face actually became a little rounder. The weather was not good that day. It was windy outside and it looked like it was going to rain. But today someone came to ask Mr. Song to host the funeral for their family. As soon as Mr. Song heard the name of the deceased, he didn't say anything and brought him here. In front of the mourning hall in the house, several children were already crying together. After Mr. Song comforted the family members for a few words, he took Su Tong into the mourning hall and came to the room where the old man placed his body. Because this is a house built by the family, after setting up the mourning hall, the body will be parked at home for 2 days before being sent to the crematorium. Therefore, before that, Mr. Song needs to enter the house and cast a final spell on the deceased. Of course, this is what everyone said on the official side. In fact, Mr. Song wanted to draw out the resentment of the deceased before his death. According to the family members, they actually heard their father speaking during the wake last night. What's even more strange is that this morning, the body of the deceased actually sat upright and didn't slowly lie down until noon. When he entered the room and looked at the black and white photos hanging on the wall, Su Tong couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. After thinking about it carefully, he finally remembered and thought to himself, "Oh, it's him." He had met the man who passed away today. He remembered that he and Mr. Song had met Mr. Zhang when they had mutton soup before. Volume 2, Chapter 54. I remember that Mr. Song greeted him at that time. Although the old man didn't speak at that time, he was in good spirits. He never thought that the old man would die if he said no. I heard from family members that when they called the old man to get up in the morning, they found that the old man was actually wearing a shroud and lying upright on the bed. When he stepped forward and touched him, he was already cold. The whole family was panicked at this moment, but some elderly people said that it was a joy and mourning, with smiles on their faces without any trace of sadness. At least in the eyes of these old people, it is a great blessing not to get sick in the hospital, to walk without pain or haste, and to close their eyes in a decent manner. Many people came to pay homage, including many local business elites and municipal officials. A little inquiry revealed that this old man Zhang is also a well-known university professor with a lot of talents all over the world. But when Su Tong took one look at the corpse, he felt something was wrong. Although his facial features looked peaceful, as if he was asleep, they always gave people a tense feeling, which made people feel very uncomfortable just by looking at it. "Old guy, you must save face and suffer the consequences." Old Song glanced at old man Zhang and couldn't help but shake his head and curse. He gently opened the old man's mouth with his fingers to show Su Tong. Su Tong didn't see anything strange, but he smelled a special odor. Su Tong raised his eyebrows slightly, then looked carefully up and down on old man Zhang, and found that there were some tiny thread fragments between his fingernails. After gently pressing old man Zhang's abdomen with his fingers a few times, he couldn't help but look at old man Song strangely and whispered, "Suicide." The fluid accumulation in old man Zhang's abdomen revealed that his stomach had begun to rot very quickly. It was not visible now because the shroud was wide. And judging from the bending of his fingers and the threads in the gaps between his nails, he must have experienced a struggle before his death. After all, he even wore his shroud neatly, which showed that he took his own death very seriously. He washed himself clean long before he died. There were actually threads in his nails, which showed that the process of death was very painful. Su Tong's eyes suddenly caught sight of the bottle of sleeping pills on the bedside, and he probably thought that the old man might have committed suicide by taking sleeping pills. Snort. Old Song snorted coldly. When he checked old man Zhang's pulse, he felt that this old guy would be fine if he lived for a few more years. However, old man Zhang has never smiled since he found out that he had Alzheimer's disease. He has been a scholar and a teacher all his life, so of course he knows what Alzheimer's disease is. A fool like old man drags down the whole family and even becomes incontinent. This was a result that old man Zhang could not accept. He could not imagine what it would be like to reach such a stage that he died in a state of confusion. People would just feel pitiful when they saw his skinny body. Ever since, I thought of suicide as a way to escape, hoping that I would die in a dignified way. But what he didn't know was that among all suicide methods, taking sleeping pills to commit suicide is undoubtedly the most painful one, second only to drinking paraquat. The drug will cause gastric irritation and cause vomiting and strong acidity in the semi-sleep state. Because the nerves are paralyzed, the person cannot move, and the vomited liquid will enter the lungs and nasal cavity, causing great breathing pain and burning sensation in the lungs. The person cannot move, but has to suffer for about 15 minutes. Well, if I really want to describe this feeling, to put it simply, it's like choking on the chili oil. Mr. Song was both hateful and pitiful towards him, but in the end he let Su Tong complete the entire resentment operation. 3 sticks of yellow incense were used as a guide, inserted into the arms of the paper man, and a bowl of white wine was poured over. Su Tong followed Su Tong's imitation of Chen Lao and chanted the incantation, causing the paper man to burst into flames, and then the fire dissipated. At this time, a stream of black blood began to flow out of old man Zhang's nose. He quickly put the black blood into the glass bottle he had prepared earlier, and then sprinkled money around it. Sure enough, the face of old man Zhang, who was lying on the bed, relaxed a lot, and his expression suddenly became natural and relaxed. After doing everything, Su Tong carefully put away the resentful ink. After opening the door and letting the family members in, They saw their old father on the bed, and the tension in his expression that made them feel worried had disappeared, and they all immediately heaved a sigh of relief. A stack of thick red envelopes was handed over. Just looking at the thickness of the red envelopes, it was worth at least 10,000 yuan. Sending such a large amount of money must not only be for Mr. Song to preside over the ceremony. The boss whispered a few words in Mr. Song's ear, to the effect that Mr. Song should not announce the true cause of Mr. Zhang's death. Old Song took another look at old man Zhang lying on the bed, took the money and threw it to Su Tong. Then he took him outside to wait. In the end, he did not participate in the so-called farewell ceremony. An old man and a young man squatted in the doorway in the shade and started smoking and puffing away smoke. Especially Su Tong's big hookah. The good guy spit out the smoke, and those who didn't know it thought he was having a barbecue. Some people say that life is unfair, but death is the only fairness in this world. This is true, but it is also wrong. Mr. Song watched the Zhang family put the body into the iron can in the funeral parlor. His eyes were particularly melancholy, and he grinned. Actually, people will die sooner or later while they are alive. But there are still grades of death. If those masters of the Tao die, it is called becoming ascension. When people like us die, it is called having perfect merit and virtue. As he said this, old man Zhang, who was thrown into the iron coffin with a finger, hated the iron and said, "But this kind of suicide, in the words of the underworld, is just eating enough to support it, and increasing the workload of the underworld out of thin air. Do you think the devils from the king of hell below will look good on you? It can range from being sent to hell to have skin and cramps for 100 years, to being beaten to death in vain. But if you can compete for some money, although the result will not change, the process will be completely different." Su Tong rolled his eyes when he heard this, nodded repeatedly and said, "I understand, I will give you money to guide you when we get back, and I will burn a terracotta warrior for you and line up for you." I went to the underworld, not to rebel." Mr. Song kicked Su Tong hard. After the two had a banquet and arranged the funeral of Lao Zhang's family, it was almost night when the two returned home. Su Tong dotted the eyes of a paper man with the resentful ink he got today. The eyes of the paper man whose eyes were dotted suddenly had a strange sense of agility in their still white eyes. This sense of agility might be very pleasing if it appeared in birds and animals. But it happened to appear on a paper man, which was more terrifying. He lit the paper figure on fire, and as the flames rose with desire, Su Tong suddenly felt an unexplained lightness coming over him. He knew that this was exactly what he would get from completing the entire paper tie ceremony. After a while, Su Tong felt that his soul seemed to have become much stronger, as if he had received some mysterious increase. This discovery made him extremely happy. Mr. Song, who was sitting by the bonfire, just looked at him with a smile. "Not bad, he has made some progress. Go and burn the next few." As a result, Su Tong threw the body of the master's wife that he had dismantled before into the fire. The bonfire burned more and more fiercely, as if it was trying to burn away the past in Mr. Song's heart. "Master, do you want to add some ingredients?" Su Tong couldn't help but turned around and asked, as if he could tell that Mr. Song was unhappy. "What to add?" Mr. Song frowned and asked in confusion. "Cumin, chili pepper? Sweet chili sauce is also fine." The more he listened, the more something was wrong. Mr. Song looked up and saw that Su Tong had taken out a barbecue from somewhere, sat in front of the campfire with a small brush, and was sprinkling large amounts of condiments on it. "It's a joy, the fragrance is overflowing." Seeing this, Mr. Song's mouth twitched, and just when he was about to curse, there was a sudden knock on the door. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 181. Who is knocking on the door in the middle of the night? Su Tong did not move, but looked at the old man behind him who was about to take off his shoes. The old man raised his eyebrows slightly, put on his shoes with one hand, and nodded towards him. Seeing this, Su Tong stood up, walked a few steps in front of the door and shouted, "Who is it?" While he was speaking, a small paper figurine flew out of his hand and quietly stuck to the door beam. There was no response from the door, they just continued to knock on the door. Boom, boom, boom. This time the knock on the door was obviously much louder than before. Su Tong's face turned cold, and when he was about to speak, he heard a middle-aged man's voice coming from outside the door, "Eat the claws of Nian Nian, Qian Kang 11, my dear, please don't praise me, it won't collapse the sky on the top of the mountain." Good guy, this is what Lao Jianghu said. Even though he was instilled with a lot of black knowledge by Mr. Song every day, he was also confused by these words. It's like a student who has just learned addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Who can stand it if you suddenly face a mathematical Olympiad problem? Fortunately, Mr. Song was at the back. When he heard this, he stepped forward and cupped his hands through the door and said, "It turns out to be Brother Me. He rarely visits. My house is in disarray and there is no place to stay. Please forgive me, Brother Me. I'll ask my little disciple to give it to me. You have to pay your respects." As he spoke, Su Tong clasped his hands together and bowed towards the door with a bow. In the past few days, the power of my Shankao Bao has become many times stronger than before. As soon as I bowed down, a breath of energy and spirit came together and hit the door hard. Boom! As soon as the door swung, a muffled sound came from behind the door, and a strange cry was heard, "Hard, hard, the wind is pulling hard." After saying this, there was no sound. When Su Tong saw this, he was about to open the door to see who it was, but he was stopped by Mr. Song. He quietly opened the courtyard door a small crack, looked up sideways, and saw that there was actually a stick stuck in the beam. A bloody finger. The fingers looked extraordinarily thick, and the flesh on them was more like chicken claw-like skin. The sharp nails shone with a layer of fluorescence in the dark, making them look particularly penetrating. "Humph, what a small trick." Mr. Song sneered and put his hand on it. It turned out that the permeable appearance was just a finger caught, and the dark and slightly thin finger inside was the real finger. He threw the finger caught to Su Tong, and as for the finger, Mr. Song casually threw it under his feet, stepped on it a few times, and then stepped on it into the soil. "Master, that was." Su Tong stood behind and watched, a little understanding, but also a little confused. Mr. Song then explained to him with a smile, "Those who eat rest are from the Jianghu people, and their claws are the craftsmen. Together they are the craftsmen who eat the food of the Jianghu. The latter part is called Qian Kangzi, and the word rice is missing. It means his surname is Me, and he thinks you are not qualified enough to let me out." In the past, there was this kind of person in the world of martial arts. I don't know where I developed the ability to practice horizontally, and they only ate the food of the martial arts. You can eat wherever you go. The so-called skill of eating is nothing more than two words: getting beaten. For example, lie down on the gaming table in your casino and play for 10 minutes. No iron tools or ropes are allowed. If you let go for 10 minutes, it doesn't matter how many people you ask to beat me. Beating me to death is considered capable. But if you can't kill me, hey, give me money. This is the Jianghu man who eats and rests his thoughts. Today, this person also brought some skills and is called Guatianman. Usually there are not one or two people, but at least 3 people. One person grabs the door beam with one hand, and the other 2 hide behind and hang their legs with ropes. It's similar to what I just said. The general idea is that I hung on the door beam of your house. You can let me come down today because of your ability. If you can't let me come down, hey, either you agree to his request or he will kill your whole family. Of course, to put it bluntly, it is to test your ability. If you really encounter ruthless people, they will run faster than a dog. Just like when Su Tong hit a mountain button, one of his fingers was broken off, and the group disappeared in a flash. This group of people were just pawns for others to test, and neither Mr. Song nor him took them seriously. Instead, he took the opportunity to give Su Tong a good talk about the slang of the world. Although everyone's circles are different, they can never deviate from the same tradition. It is nothing more than hiding a prefix, mixed with two dialects or metaphors, this just a few methods. It's not difficult. In fact, this kind of code is everywhere in life. Even ordinary people understand it, such as technician and healthcare. When I see these two words, I believe someone has already smiled knowingly, and my mind has begun to flash back some indescribable images. There is an old tea house in the east of the old town of El City. This tea house was called Fenglalu back then, and it was a somewhat famous place. The two-story building is facing the horse market. Many horse dealers ride their horses through rain or shine. After finally arriving at the horse market, they will drink a bowl of tea to quench their thirst, so it is called Fenglai building. But some people say that Fenglalu means that the trees are still and the wind is not stopping. It is a gathering place for people from all walks of life. Especially in front of the horse market is the Tianqiao Street intersection. It is the most prosperous and lively place, where dragons and snakes mix. That's why some people say that this tea house is just a place where people from all walks of life drink tea and chat. It's just that this Fenglai building was now surrounded by self-built private houses on all sides, making it look old and dilapidated. There is no sign of Fenglai building at the entrance, and there is still a shabby private house, which is blocked by the main entrance of the tea house, making it look like an abandoned building. But in the past 2 days, this abandoned building has experienced a second spring, and someone actually bought it. After the purchase, the workers worked overnight, and in just 2 days the tea house had a completely new look. Now, the head of the family in front of the tea house, named Mao Luzi, was not happy. Their family ran a car repair shop on the street. The business was not very good. Once the tea house opened, no one promoted it, but more and more cars parked in front of their house every day. A Rolls-Royce, a Mercedes-Benz, a BMW, or at worst an Audi. If you drive a Mazda, you would be embarrassed to put it here. Normally, with so many cars parked in front of the door, Donkey should be happy. No, he is not happy. Why? Because he repairs bicycles. Business was not good at first, but you park so many luxury cars in front of my house, and it became even worse. Donkey is the honorific title given to him in this street. Whatever temper you think of a donkey, he has the same temper. He is also very small-minded. I feel that this tea house has been so prosperous recently and most of the people coming and going are strangers. Who is the thief? If you don't recruit thieves, are you still blocking your own business? When he thought of this, Mao Donzi was not happy. He made various reporting calls every day and even blocked the intersection of the tea house. But the strange thing was that he blocked the road with wooden boards, but the business in the tea house was on the contrary, more and more prosperous. In the past few days, it has been so lively and crowded with guests and friends that Mao Donkey once wondered if it was haunted. Until at night, a harsh knock on the door woke up the donkey family. Who? The donkey looked at his watch and saw that it was only 4 o'clock in the morning. His temper suddenly rose, but the banging on the door continued, so the donkey took the trouble to walk to the door angrily wearing pants and holding an axe. He opened the door and took a closer look, but saw no one. No one. Just when the donkey was confused, he suddenly heard a burst of laughter from above his head. When the donkey raised his head, he was surprised to see a person hanging on the door beam above his head. Just listen to the man showing his mouth full of yellow teeth. Hey, the mountains will not turn, the water will turn, and the water will not turn, the head will turn. Before the donkey came to his senses, he saw the other party grabbing his head with one hand, twisting his forefingers and making a click sound, and the donkey's head was twisted from the chest to the back. Carry it on your back. Looking at the donkey lying on the ground, the three of them jumped down. The leader looked at his broken finger and said to himself, "That's just me. If I lose a finger, it will be disadvantageous." As they spoke, the three of them took out the knives from their waists, walked into the door, and closed the door silently. From then on, the door of this car repair shop never opened again, and the donkey family also disappeared inexplicably. Of course, these are all things for later. Today, Su Tong followed Mr. Song to hold a funeral for an elderly family. Kneel down. As soon as the words fell, the voice was as loud as a bell, and relatives, friends, and family members dressed in mourning robes knelt down and worshipped on the ground. After experiencing the previous funeral ceremonies, Su Tong has now become a qualified funeral host, and is already familiar with a set of traditional funeral ceremonies. The most important thing is that Su Tong's exaggerated acting talent makes every word, and even his deep eyes, solemn, calm and rich emotions comparable to that of a national recitation master. Hosting several games in a row allowed him to watch the farewells between the living and the dead, and also gave him a deeper understanding of life and death. This not only brings dignity to the deceased, but also brings soul comfort to the living. Perhaps the work of the papermaker itself is exactly like this. It is this level of understanding that makes every aspect of Su Tong's hosting extraordinarily heavy and professional, giving people a sacred and profound aura inside and out, making people selectively ignore his young appearance. Mr. Song didn't say anything about this transformation, but he couldn't help but feel a turmoil in his heart. At that time, he could not stop making progress in his spiritual practice, so his master Shuigui asked him to learn to conduct funerals. For this reason, he hired the best master, but it was only after his master passed away for several years that he truly felt his master's good intentions. It only took Su Tong such a short time to really integrate into it, and even did better than him. This understanding is simply incredible. But it also made Mr. Song happy. He sat aside and drank a sip of tea. He glanced sideways and saw that he looked much older in the mirror. He couldn't help but sigh and slowly walked out of the morning hall with his hands behind his back, and went home first. After all, the master leads you in, and cultivation depends on the individual. Su Tong has now truly stepped into this threshold. He has taught everything he can, and it's time to go back and give himself an explanation. Mr. Song took advantage of Su Tong's funeral arrangements and returned home slowly. Pushing open the door, he subconsciously looked at the chairs in the living room. As a result, Mr. Song suddenly came to his senses when he saw that the chair was completely empty. So he walked to the bedside and was about to open the bedside table, but suddenly he was startled and saw a woman lying on the bed. Who? Mr. Song was startled at first, then became suspicious again. He stepped forward and lifted up the quilt to see that it was actually a silicone doll. "Bah, this brat, you scared me." Looking at the silicone doll lying on his bed, Mr. Song first cursed, and then couldn't help but pinch it a few times curiously. He realized that the skin and flesh of the doll were very similar to that of a real person, and he couldn't help but sigh at the greatness of the science. It can be made so realistic. Mr. Song's face turned red as he thought about it, and he cursed, "Bah, bah, bah, you stinky boy." Then he shook his head and opened the bedside table. Opening the most inconspicuous small box inside, Mr. Song walked step by step to the yard with the box in his arms and sat on the rocking chair. First he took out his reading glasses from his arms, then carefully placed his hand on the box and gently wiped the dust on it. The box was opened, and Mr. Song took out a photo from inside. The woman in the photo had big braids, dark eyes, and a snickering look. Looking at Mr. Song, he couldn't help but laugh along with her. Then he took out a ruler. These long years also left traces on the ruler, making the ruler seem to be coated with a layer of patina, shining in the sun. He tried tapping it twice on the palm of his hand, and a tingling sensation hit him. He couldn't help but think of the time when his master used this to teach him a lesson. It hurt at that time, but it was sweet to think about it now, but when I thought about it further, I was full of regrets. When I put the ruler back in the box, Mr. Song raised his head, and his hazy eyes were twinkling with some expectation. Ching-er! In a daze, a familiar shout echoed in his ears. Ching-er! He raised his head in a daze and saw an old man in a coat holding a bunch of candied haws at the door, looking at him with a smile. The old man waved to him, and Mr. Song's eyes suddenly lit up. He subconsciously stretched out his palm and pulled it. The palm, which was calloused and chipped, turned into a white and tender little hand in an instant. "Master, you are back." "I'm back, and I brought you some candied haws." Looking at the bright red candied haws, he couldn't help but open his mouth and bite into it. The taste was still the same, so sweet and sour. "Ching-er, let's go home." The old man turned around to pull him away. Old Song was stunned for a moment, as if thinking about something. He looked back. In a trance, he seemed to see a young man running towards him sitting in the rocking chair. After thinking about it, a grin suddenly appeared on his fair face, and he picked a candied haws from his hand and threw it in front of the young man. "Master, master!" Su Tong put his finger under Mr. Song's nose, and his eyes suddenly turned red. Just when his nose was sore, there was a sudden bang. He looked up suddenly and saw a stone flying down from nowhere and hitting him on the box in Mr. Song's arms. The box was knocked over by a stone and fell to the ground. Suddenly, the broken things were scattered all over the floor. Su Tong took a look and saw a yellowed book falling on the ground under the stone. The 5 characters King Yun Yishulu are written generously on it in neat simplified Chinese characters. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 182. The next day, the neighbors on the street walked out and were startled when they saw the white sails hung in front of the courtyard door opposite and the white couplets pasted on them. "It seems that he still doesn't understand what happened. It wasn't until I inquired that I found out that old man Song was suddenly gone." After hearing the news, the mood of the neighbors was very different. The elderly people sighed, and there were many old people who still wanted to call Mr. Song uncle based on their seniority. They are witnesses of the times, watching the Song family's glory days as cars and horses passed by in front of the house, and the house was full of guests and friends. Later, his family was broken up, his wife and children were separated, and he was lonely in his later years. Just like the lyrics in the Peach Blossom Fan, "I watched him build a silo, watched him entertain guests, and watched his tower collapse." But what I didn't expect was that old man Song, who was lonely in his later years, did not end sadly like the TV series Dream of Red Mansions. Instead, he passed away particularly peacefully. It is said that when people were carrying the body, they saw old man Song sitting on the chair with a red face and a smile, as if falling asleep listening to a ditty. The most peculiar thing is that other people's bodies are cold when they die, but old man Song's body is actually slightly warm. Reminiscent of the fact that old man Song usually helped other people's funerals and never took any money from him, people couldn't help but wonder whether this was because he had accumulated evil virtue and passed away in bliss. As a result, more and more people came to pay their respects. Most of them were neighbors, and some were people who had been favored by Mr. Song and helped host the funeral. After learning the news, they also came over to pay their respects briefly. As a disciple and a distant nephew, Su Tong naturally assumed the role of a filial son and knelt on the ground to return the favor to the many worshippers. Sad. Sort of. More of a reluctance, this old man was the first person who was willing to accept him after he came out of the mental hospital, even though he only came here with the purpose of honing his paper-making skills. But I didn't expect to receive such unprecedented love and dedication. Before he had time to enjoy the care and repay it in the best way he could, he suddenly left. What's more important is that this love did not disappear when Mr. Song left. Instead, it stayed with him in another way in the Kingyun Yishulu. You can understand this book as the anecdotes that Mr. Song encountered in his life, or you can understand it as the secret that Mr. Song passed down to himself. Mr. Song's funeral was not particularly extravagant. Su Tong gave each person who came to pay homage to him a white envelope with 2 green 50 yuan bills in it. The amount of money was not much, but 20 to 30,000 were dispersed in one day. Some people even came over and kowtowed in front of Mr. Song's photo as soon as they heard that they had money. Su Tong was watching from the side with half-squinted eyes. If he met someone who was particularly good at knocking, he would specially give 2 extra white envelopes. Now the people behind them kowtowed and became even more energetic. For those who came for red envelopes, Su Tong didn't even bother to return the gifts and sent them away with a white envelope. Of course, it is inevitable that some people will gossip. Just like the old ladies standing in the corner, taking the white envelopes given by Su Tong from their grandsons, they were muttering, "Humph, you are so generous. He got a real estate out of thin air, so he is pretending to be so generous to show outsiders. This is the reason why the emperor ascended the throne and granted amnesty to the world, declaring that he is the orthodox successor. In the final analysis, he is spending money to silence us. That's it, so stingy." The old lady's face looked like someone who had been there before, which really made everyone think it made sense. After the ceremony, the local funeral home sent a car to take the old man to the crematorium for cremation. The few people who were rushing to kowtow just now disappeared immediately. Su Tong did not hold any farewell ceremony and simply bought a luxurious cemetery for the old man. In fact, according to local custom, guests still have to entertain guests, but he omitted the step, which made the old ladies who wanted to have a big meal and even put plastic bags in them were disappointed. Now there was even more gossip. What's even weirder is that a neighbor actually stopped him. This neighbor lived next door, his surname was Lu, and his name was Lu Lan. Of course, this is not his real name, but the neighbors call him that, so he knows what kind of character this person is. Lu Lan grabbed Su Tong and said to him sincerely with a "I care for you" expression, "We have to hold a banquet, otherwise it will be difficult for the neighbors to get along with each other in the future." Su Tong smiled mysteriously at this, patted the old neighbor's arm and said, "I'll do it, we'll do it tonight." Without waiting for the other party to ask another question, he turned around and walked into the courtyard door, closing the door with his backhand, causing Lu Lan to have a gray nose on his face. Until night, the door was never opened again, causing Lu Lan, who was still watching, to stand at the door and curse for a while. Zi. In the dim room, Su Tong tried to sit on Mr. Song's usual Taishi chair, and gently stroked the smooth armrests of the chair. The long-lasting patina on them felt particularly comfortable to the touch. He happily smoked 2 water pipes, glanced at the clock hanging on the wall, pinched his fingers, and sang in the tune of Henan opera, "Come on ah ah. Dong 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 dong, boom boom boom." The rapid sound of the gong made the lights of the neighbors on the left and right turn on again after they had just extinguished them. The first person to be woken up was naturally the old Lu family next door. Lu Lan poked his head out of the house and cursed, "Who is so wicked in the middle of the night?" After saying this, he walked out of the house with his clothes on. As soon as I went out, I saw the lights in the Song family's courtyard were brightly lit, and I could only hear the faint sound of gongs and drums inside. Listening carefully, there seemed to be people cheering inside. So I frowned and walked to the door and took a look. I saw these large wooden tables in the yard, with snacks, wine, and dishes on them. There were already 3 or 4 people sitting at the table eating and drinking. Seeing this, Lu Lan slapped his thigh, "You are really a scumbag, waiting for a banquet in the middle of the night." As he spoke, he walked inside and saw only 5 or 6 tables inside, with people sitting scattered around. In front of it was a temporary shed. Inside, you could vaguely see someone beating gongs and drums behind the shed. Seeing this, he was not polite. He sat down, picked up a handful of peanuts on the table and stuffed them into his mouth. At the same time, he took the wine on the table and filled it up for himself. After a while, more and more people came in. Some of them he recognized and said hello to each other, but some he didn't recognize and just felt that they looked unfamiliar and didn't look like people here. Just as he was doubting, the drums were beating rapidly in front of him, and a big-faced man in costume walked into the drum beats, speaking in a melodious and euphemistic Beijing accent. "I think my late grandfather would have died long ago." This is the main theme of the funeral songs in the Peking Opera Banquet, Zhuliang's Funeral, Qin Suimei's Crying Soul, Flying Snow in June, etc. But the performance of Banquet is even more important. When you open your accent, your words should be straight and round, and your voice should be powerful, but you should not lose the softness of the Beijing accent. Instead, you should give people a round and polished feeling. Therefore, this opening made everyone below applaud. Hearing the drum beat getting faster and faster, Lu Lan, who was sitting on the chair, raised his head and took a closer look. "Hey, isn't this that brat? He can also sing." Suddenly his face became happy. He drank a glass of wine with peanuts, and picked up a snack from time to time and ate it deliciously. There was no trace of sleepiness on his face. While eating and watching, Lu Lan suddenly felt someone sitting next to him. He glanced sideways, but he didn't care at all. However, just as he was about to take a sip of wine, Lu Lan suddenly seemed to remember something and suddenly turned his head to take a closer look. He saw the man sitting at his table, who looked more and more familiar. Are you, Brother Wang? You are not dead." Before he could finish his words, he suddenly covered his mouth, and cold sweat rolled down his forehead. He didn't know this brother from the Wang family very well. He only knew that he worked at a motorcycle factory. Last winter, his wife sewed a cotton hat for him because he was afraid it would be cold at work. As a result, it happened to be the day when the new machine was being debugged. His cotton hat accidentally got rolled in, and half of the Tianling cap flew up on the spot. He died miserably. He remembered this clearly. After hearing this, the other party turned to look at him and immediately smiled. "Lu Lan, you have become stupid after drinking. Can a dead person sit here and watch a show with you?" "Yes, yes, yes." Lu Lan also drank 2 glasses of wine, and his brain was clouded. Hearing this, he nodded subconsciously. Yes, I am confused, my brain is confused." "I think you are also a scumbag. You are only in your early 50s and you are already confused." Brother Wang curled his lips, glanced at Lu Lan with contempt and said, "Look at me, I'm not confused because I have no brains." As he said this, he saw Brother Wang lift his scalp with his expert hand. There were no bones under the scalp, and his head was empty and bloody. Puff. Seeing this, Lu Ian's eyes widened and he swallowed a mouthful of wine in his throat before spitting it out again. His face turned red and white for a while, and his mouth twisted. Just when he was about to shout out, Lu Lan suddenly felt something was wrong. He looked to the side and saw that the play on the stage had already finished singing. Everyone was turning around and looking towards him. Their faces were rotten, and some even had their intestines dislodged. Suddenly a cool breeze blew over, and Lu Ian's scalp suddenly felt numb, and the blood all over his body went cold. He looked at a few familiar faces among them. With a thump in his heart, he suddenly remembered. No wonder he looked so familiar. He remembered that the man among them was the one who was hit and killed by a large truck at the intersection the year before last. There is also the guy whose head looks like he has melted away. He was originally the owner of a hot pot restaurant in Zhejiang. In order to attract business, he set up a large oil pot at the door. He wanted to imitate Sai Kakao in Chongqing and cook the hot pot base in front of everyone. As a result, the oil started to burn. When I stepped on the stool to put the seasonings, my sole slipped and I fell into it, performing a scene of frying a living person for everyone. These are all evil spirits. Lu Lan trembled in his heart, turned around and ran away with a loud shout. As soon as he ran out, he saw a sudden burst of fire behind him. The firelight shone in the air and burned bigger and bigger. Lu Lan stood at the door of his house and watched. He saw that after the firelight rushed into the sky became pitch black. At this time, he vaguely heard the sound of a camel bell on the street. He squinted and saw a group of figures in black and white clothes, holding a mourning stick in one hand and a chain in the other, heading towards him. "Come over." Seeing this, Lu Lan suddenly had a bad thought in his heart. He couldn't explain exactly what he felt, but he just instinctively wanted to run home. But who knew who had locked the door? Lu Lan was so anxious that he banged on the door. "Open the door. Who is at home? Hurry up and open the door for me. Open the door." Boom boom boom. Lu Lan was so anxious that he screamed and looked back from time to time, only to see the group of figures walking faster and faster, as if they would reach him in the blink of an eye. This made him shiver even more, as if a mouse had met a cat, exuding fear from his bones. Perhaps Lu Yan's wailing and banging on the door were so harsh that the pair of figures in black and white clothes at the head of the team gradually slowed down and looked towards him. Just the glance made Lu Yan's body seem to freeze, and a strong premonition rushed directly to his forehead, as if he would never be able to go back if he was targeted by these people. Buzz. Fortunately, at this time, the door of the room suddenly opened, and Lu Lan felt his eyes go dark, and then he didn't know anything else. I don't know how long it took, but when Lu Lan opened his eyes again, it was already dawn outside. Huh. Looking at the bright sky outside, Lu Lan sat in front of the bed for more than 10 seconds, still thinking about what happened last night. Are you dreaming? Just as he was wondering, he saw the door being pushed open and it was Lu Yan's wife. As soon as he saw him getting up, his wife put a bowl of noodles heavily on the table and said angrily, "Oh, I was really blind back then. Why did you marry a lazy guy like you? The sun is shining on your butt. Are you sleeping?" "Er." Lu Lan smashed his mouth, got up from the bed, and held the noodles in his hand. "My wife remade the mattress and said while making the bed, 'You are too big-hearted. Even though there was such a big fire last night, you could still sleep.'" Squirt, cough cough cough. This sentence almost made Lu Lan choke to death. He choked for a few times and quickly drank a sip of water before he recovered. He turned around and said, "What's the matter? What kind of fire could it be?" "The old Song family next door had a big fire at 4 o'clock this morning. 2 old houses and 1 tile-roofed house were completely burned. I was almost frightened. Even if I call you dead, you won't get up." As soon as this matter was mentioned, Lu Yan's wife was so angry that she gritted her teeth, but she didn't notice that Lu Yan's face had become a little unnatural. He ate the noodles blankly and began to think about what happened last night. Is it a coincidence? Or do you think about it every day and dream about it at night? Just when Lu Lan was thinking wildly, his wife began to mutter about other things. The same goes for the fire department. Even though it's next door, there's a 2-meter wide road between them. His house's fire couldn't get through it. I didn't know that that bastard tried his best to smash our door, but it scared me. I didn't want to open it at first, but I didn't know what to think, so I opened it, but when I opened the door, I didn't even see anyone." Bang! As soon as Lu Yan's wife finished speaking, the bowl in Lu Yan's hand fell to the ground. He rolled his eyes and fainted from the shock. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 183. Yin Drama. The world is full of ghosts, and it is difficult to survive without seeing the blue sky. During the day, His Highness the city god sleeps, and in the middle of the night, there is a ghost temple party. This is a poem written by Mr. Song in King UnlimitedFlow. It is a scene he saw in Qingcheng Mountain in his early years. It is said that a Taoist in Qingcheng Mountain took him to a temple fair. This temple fair is very strange. It is not held in a bustling city or countryside, but in a dilapidated town god's temple in a secluded mountain area. There is even a cemetery not far away, and there is not even a single house within a few kilometers. As soon as Mr. Song entered, he saw an empty temple fair with scarecrows stuck everywhere. There are no serious ordinary people, but there are quite a few low-life people gathered here. When he asked, he realized that this was the so-called ghost temple fair. The so-called ghost temple fair usually involves people from one or more cultivating families gathering together and using various means to gather all the ghosts who have died in vain. Then everyone showed their magical powers to save these ghosts who died in vain to earn some virtue. It sounds similar to the current business routine: first make the cake bigger, and then everyone eats it. Mr. Song was unprepared at the time, so he simply wandered around. As a result, he accidentally bumped into Feng Jinda, a disciple of Li Yuan in Shijuli Yulai. The two drank and fought with each other, looking like they were late to meet each other. It was precisely because of Feng Jinda's relationship that he was fortunate enough to observe Li Yuan's tricks and play dirty tricks from the sidelines. To put it bluntly, it is to sing for ghosts and use funeral performances to attract ghosts. On the empty table, yellow incense tributes are placed for these dead ghosts to eat. In the end, he used drama to resolve the resentment of these dead ghosts and earn some virtue for himself. But Mr. Song felt that although this method was good, it was too inefficient and could touch too few evil spirits in one night. After the temple fair, Mr. Song and Feng Jinda drank again in Qingcheng Mountain. He said that there would be fewer and fewer ghost temple fairs in the future, and there would not be much moral virtue to be earned. I heard that he is going to Hong Kong with his team. In some places where movies about ghosts and zombies are filmed, when something evil happens, they often ask their theater troupes to perform a night of sinister dramas first, so as to keep the ghosts in those places at bay. By then, they will have both moral character and money, so they can kill two birds with one stone. If there is a chance, he will even open a film company and make a movie about zombies. Therefore, the two of them broke off from each other and never heard from each other again. Later in the story, Mr. Song came up with an idea of his own, using a play to summon the dead ghosts, and then use their 7 paper figures as tributes and money as inducements to summon the underworld to send all the dead ghosts away. Of course, this is just an idea. After all, he had spent so many years pricking the paper figures before he could paint the paper figures' eyes with resentful ink. How could he have time to learn the skills of singing and opera? In fact, Mr. Song's idea is correct. He can think so, and others can think of this too. But the problem is that it is difficult for ordinary people to say that they have learned all their skills in a lifetime. Not to mention having to learn other people's skills at the same time. If he really had such ability, why would there be such a thing as a ghost temple fair? "Hello sir, would you like something to drink?" the flight attendant walked to the seat and asked Su Tong. "Thank you for a Coke." He slowly closed the book King UnlimitedFlow in his hand, raised his head and smiled at the stewardess, and then he couldn't help but look out the window of the plane, and saw that the city below was getting smaller and smaller. The huge L city gradually shrank into a ball, and we could clearly see that this ancient capital city was surrounded by mountains, including Bamang, Dongsong, Nanjiao, and Seong'er. It gives people the feeling of a barrier from all directions, but unfortunately he doesn't understand yin and yang feng shui, and he can't see why. I don't know how my wife is doing now. Thinking of this, he took out the small box that his master gave him from the props book. When he held it in his hand, it immediately felt like a leaking battery, making his fingers numb. Especially my own prop card source seems to be particularly interested in this thing. As long as I hold this thing source, this prop card will keep flashing. He hadn't thought about opening the box, but as soon as his hand touched the switch of the box, it was bounced back by an invisible force. At the same time, there was a sound from the prop book. Legendary items, please enter the corresponding scenario world before opening them. Note, it can only be opened by entering the corresponding scenario world. The higher the world matching level, the higher the rewards you will get, but the difficulty of this world will increase accordingly. This is the reason why he has not opened the box, but it also strengthens his determination to enter the big script progress in the era of panic. He had a strong premonition that he would meet his master again in this script, and he might even meet his master. This premonition gave him endless expectations. What's strange is that Gao Zhou has already submitted an application, but so long ago, they still haven't received any news about entering the script world. This made Su Tong feel a little helpless. After the fire last night, he hurriedly got on the plane to Xiangzi and prepared to find Gao Zhou. On the one hand, the two of them can sit together and fill in the gaps. On the other hand, it is also convenient to help Gao Zhou recover the lost soul of his old man after this script. As for the ID card and information, he had already obtained it in the archives room of the mental hospital last time. His plan was correct, but the journey was so bumpy that he almost vomited. Since there is no direct connection, he needs to change flights and spend a day in CQ. After tasting CQ's hot pot, he has to say that the hot pot is still as delicious as CQ's. The bright red butter looks very appetizing, and paired with the fresh duck intestines, tripe, and yellow throat, the crispy texture is simply satisfying. Hot pot is no different from other cuisines. It requires not only knife skills, but also fire skills, plate presentation, creativity, etc. In comparison, hot pot pays more attention to the freshness of the raw materials. Take duck intestines as an example. Few people eat these in L City, and most restaurants won't accept them. There's no way to guarantee their freshness, and the taste is naturally greatly compromised. In addition, there were also tender bamboo shoots. Su Tong ate a large plate by himself, which was enough for 4 people, not counting the 2 large pots of rice on the side. The store owner said, "If you don't become a food expo," the owner was so humble that he was given 2 bottles of sour plum soup as a special gift when paying the bill at the end. CQ's hot pot trip is always short. When he got off the plane from Zhangjiajie and got on the train to Jishao, the dull air on the train coupled with the bumps along the way. Even with the player's physical blessing, it still made him very uncomfortable. It wasn't until about 2 o'clock in the night that I finally got off the train. As soon as he got out of the station, the cold night wind blew on his face. Because of the blessing of his dark physique, Su Tong couldn't help but take a few deep breaths and became energetic. Looking around, there are a few small 3-wheelers parked in the deserted streets. The highest building that catches the eye may be the hotel with the 7-add-1 theme hotel sign in front. Reminiscent of the magical high-rise buildings in the mountain city like CQ, a sharp contrast arises spontaneously. "Brother, do you want to buy tobacco? High-quality tobacco." At this time, a person not far away waved and shouted at him. Su Tong glanced around and saw that the person was probably in his early 30s, wearing a duckbill hat on his head, wearing travel clothes, and carrying a backpack behind him. At first glance, it looks like a tourist. "It's not enough to just ask for tobacco, you also want to give me a hookah. Screw you." The other party stood up, raised the bridge of his hat, and revealed his true face. Gao Zhou's face was very strange. The lower half of his face was very thin, but his bones and cheeks were very large and wide. The overall feeling was a bit uncoordinated. So much so that he looked 36 or 77, his face was full of vicissitudes of life, and he grinned at him. For some reason, Su Tong always reminded Su Tong of the alligator in the zoo. He definitely doesn't judge people by their appearance, he just thinks his face is abnormal. Let's go, let's talk about it in the car. Gao Zhou pointed to Wuling Hongguang on the side. After all, this is the entrance of the station. Even if there are few people, there are always many people and many eyes. Su Tong nodded and got into the car. As soon as he opened the door, a special smell in the air made him frown. When he looked back, he saw that there were no chairs in the back row, but an iron coffin. I'm sorry, it's unlucky that you're here today. My original car was hit and was just sent to the repair shop, so I can only drive this car to pick you up. Anyway, you probably won't dislike the smell. Gao Zhou said with a grin. Su Tong nodded. The last script the two of them had was filled with piles of dead people, and this taste was nothing compared to it. After getting in the car, Gao Zhou took him straight to the night market entrance. There was a local night market, but it was not as bustling as the old city. The night market here only had a few shops open. The two of them found a remote location and sat down casually. After Gao Zhou ordered a few of the store's specialty dishes, he whispered to Su Tong, I heard that Mr. Song gave away the things he brought. Su Tong calmly picked up the freshly fried small crabs and stuffed them into his mouth. He chewed them hard. It was not as delicate as eating hairy crabs. These crabs were fried thoroughly. It's crispy, generously sprinkled with seasonings, and tastes pretty good. It would be even better if paired with a bottle of wine. What surprised him was that Xiangzi, which was so far away, had already received the news. Apparently, the news that Mr. Song gave the things that Shuigui left behind to his wife has now spread to all the lower circles, including the 4 small yin gates and so on. Everyone has got the news. After all, the reason why things were so big back then was because of this thing. When Shuigui sealed this thing, no one came to ask for it, but because of the environment at that time and some special factors, no one dared to make a big deal about it. Come to ask for it? After finally waiting for the world to be at peace, Shuigui had already passed away. Mr. Song was left behind, and he hid in Tibet during those days, and suffered a lot of hardships before people were willing to give up. As a result, after so many years, news suddenly came out. Now many of the older generation were alarmed. Gao Zhou asked with a mysterious face, when you came here, did you hear about Feng Lilu? Feng Lu, Su Tong tilted his head and looked at Gao Zhou in confusion. Unexpectedly, Gao Zhou looked quite honest and still played this trick. No, seeing that he couldn't understand what he meant, Gao Zhou quickly explained, it's not Feng Lu. Oh, is it Lu Feng? Su Tong nodded and responded with a hint of disappointment. Oh. Wind, strong wind blowing, clouds flying, wind coming to the building. Gao Zhou shouted in a voice that was almost a roar, causing several people at the next table to turn around and look at him. Look at the melon seeds, and then I'll chop them up for you. Sensing these weird looks, Gao Zhou cursed fiercely. He was ugly to begin with, killing people like a butchering dog. His cold eyes swept over him, just like a big wolf dog at night, with green light shining in his eyes. Everyone who looked at it shuddered and lowered their heads, not daring to look this way. Gao Zhou is very satisfied with this, not Gao Zhou. In this 3/3 of an acre of land in western Hunan, he is the local bully. Anyone who dares to make him uncomfortable is useless, even if the township chief comes. He sat back on the chair and looked at Su Tong angrily. Fenglelu, your famous tea house in L City, can be traced back to the Ming dynasty. It was a place where people from all walks of life gathered. Oh, Gao Zhou was frothing as he spoke, but Su Tong just simply said oh and stopped talking. Seeing this, Gao Zhou could only continue, Fenglelu disappeared many years ago, and now someone has reopened Fenglelu and distributed devil-killing tips, and they are targeting your family. Su Tong ate fried crabs one by one. Hearing this, he couldn't help but look at him curiously. Then what? Don't you care about me? According to the news, it seems to be your junior wife. Gao Zhou was really defeated by Su Tong's appearance. It felt like I muttered a lot in one breath, but nothing got to the point. He, my wife is very capable. She has great skills. It's not my turn to worry about her. Su Tong knew that monk Miaojing would never easily tell everyone about his master's background after returning. After all, this matter affected not only their family, but also Guanghua Temple. In the final analysis, he dared not admit his mistakes but also wanted to be a hero. In Su Tong's view, these were two unpleasant things. Sooner or later, I have to go to Guanghua Temple and walk around without food. Of course, he would not tell Gao Zhou these things. After all, it involved a lot, so he had to be careful. After the two of them finished their supper, Gao Zhou took him straight to their house. He said he wanted to introduce his family to him. Su Tong didn't want to disturb him in the middle of the night, but he couldn't stand Gao Zhou's repeated urgings and invitations, so he had to visit late at night. In fact, this matter is nothing to the Gao Zhou family. Their family has been driving corpses for generations. They sleep during the day and drive at night. This habit has not changed after so many years. So when Su Tong rushed over, Gao Zhou's father was sitting in the living room waiting for them. As soon as he saw Su Tong and Gao Zhou's father, he raised his hand with a calm expression, crossed his fingers and said with an apologetic smile, "The fourth little vagina, Gao Tianfang, is here to pay tribute to brother Su." In terms of seniority, Su Tong is Gao Zhou's uncle and the same generation as Gao Tian. But even though his son had been vaccinated against him many times before, when he saw that Su was young, Gao Tianfang's face was calm, but he still felt very uncomfortable in his heart. Therefore, when he raised his hand, he actually had the shadow of worshipping Shankao. Just want to take this opportunity to test the depth of this kid. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 184. Father. Gao Zhou stood aside and his expression suddenly changed when he saw this. No matter how familiar he and Su Tong were, the other party was a player who killed people without batting an eyelid. He was not from a serious martial arts background and did not follow the rules of the martial arts world at all. If they fall out, they will be caught in the middle and neither of them will be human. But Gao Tianfang didn't care about this, and bowed down to Su Tong with a specious bow in his hand. Suddenly, a cool breeze rushed towards my face, and then there was a rumbling sound like a landslide. Huh! Seeing this, Su Tong was not angry but happy, and he did not try to resist. He allowed this huge aura to envelope himself. He practiced worshipping Shankao, but whether it was Mr. Song or himself, he learned from his master Shuigui. In the final analysis, the things that I have comprehended in my soul have never been experienced in a real sense. He never thought that Gao Tianfang actually knew how to worship Shankao. Although it was a bit specious, it was a rare opportunity for him. Simply don't resist at all, so that you can feel it more deeply. Seeing Su Tong's unmoved look, Gao Tianfang's face turned cold, and he crossed his hands and stretched out his fingers. "What a spirit, I admire you." With a cry of admiration, the second bow was already directed at Su Tong. This time, it was even more shocking than before. An illusion actually appeared in front of his eyes. The heaven and earth in front of him suddenly dimmed, and countless black air currents blew towards him. The first bow will hurt people's lives, the second bow will invite ghosts and gods, and the third bow will knock on the door of the king of hell. The black air blew over and hit his body, making it feel as if every piece of flesh had been scraped off with a knife. "Father." On the side, Gao Zhou saw that his father was serious, so he stepped forward to stop him, but his father kicked him to the ground and glanced at him sideways. Don't think that if you let me get up from the bed, this family will become a mess. You are in charge, get out of here. After saying that, Gao Tian lowered his fingers and slowly returned them. Each finger intertwined to form a strange gesture, and he bowed towards Su Tong again. In an instant, his eyes went dark, and he vaguely seemed to see some portal slowly opening towards him in the darkness. Seeing this, Su Tong finally moved, but slowly raised his hands. The same gesture had a completely different charm from Gao Tianfang. Every finger, and even every hair on the back of the hand, actually emitted a glimmer of light in the darkness. I bowed slightly forward, and suddenly I heard the howl of ghosts, foxes, and wolves in front of me, an indescribable sound. The aura spread around Su Tong. Boom! Suddenly, Gao Tianfang felt his hands go numb, and then an overwhelming force knocked him to the ground. When he looked closely, he saw that his hands were actually covered in patches of black and blue. The fingers were even more swollen. Don't fight, we lose. Gao Zhou's heart was in his throat when he saw this scene, and he hurried forward to help his father up. However, Gao Tianfang not only did not appreciate it, but pushed him away, got up on his own, and looked at Su Tong in front of him with a complicated expression. I saw him standing there neither humble nor arrogant, with a smile on his lips, clear black and white eyes, and a look that was neither angry nor annoyed. Gao Tianfang was in a trance and saw the shadow of Mr. Shui back then. Offend. Su Tong smiled, changed his gestures, and bowed slightly to Gao Tianfang to apologize. In fact, Gao Zhou's worries were unnecessary. During this time, he had been with Mr. Song. Even though he was not from a serious martial arts background, he was still familiar with it under Mr. Song's teachings and learned some of the habits of the Jianghu people. What is the quackery habit? Su Tong's understanding is that when it comes to rules and seniority, it's not enough to beat you if you can fight without being aggressive. If you want to fight, then you must conquer you. If you talk about rules and make friends with you again, if you are not up to the mark, then you are not good enough. Chi, I will send you to see the King of Hell early. In short, we will never force people to die unless it is absolutely necessary. Hearing this, Gao Tianfang was stunned for a second before he came back to his senses. Instead of being angry, he laughed and stepped forward to hold Su Tong's hand enthusiastically, regardless of the bruises on his hands. Okay, junior brother Su is indeed a heroic young man. This brat told me that you were Mr. Song's apprentice. I didn't believe it at first, but now I see, we are really a family. As Gao Tianfang spoke, he apologized repeatedly, as if his face had changed, and he pulled Su Tong into the house. After the two sat down, Gao Tianfang waved his hand to his son Gao Zhou to bring over the tobacco he had prepared. Try it, this is the finest tobacco leaf. As he spoke, he opened the paper bag outside, and a special smell suddenly came out from inside. Su Tong's eyes lit up, and he was not polite at all. He took out the hookah given to him by Gao Zhou, pinched a handful of shredded tobacco and stuffed it into the cigarette. In the pot. Gao Tianfang on the side even lit the fire for him personally, and his enthusiastic look made Gao Zhou on the side a bit disgusted. Brother Su, don't mind. Gao Zhou has already told you about Feng Lilu. Just before you came, Feng Lilu had sent 3 waves of people to inquire about you. I have some doubts in my heart, and I have to confirm it with you before I dare to let you in. Otherwise, my family will be destroyed soon. Gao Tianfang made it clear. What he meant was that if you really have the inheritance of Mr. I don't intend to let him in this door either. I'm so exhausted that if I tell the outside world that I haven't seen you, and I help you hide your whereabouts, I will be worthy of this favor. Let's be realistic. It's very realistic. If you don't have any strength, who will take risks with you? Don't say you are here to help. I think you are more like a refuge. But on the other hand, if you have strength and inheritance, that is a completely different attitude. I will protect you from worries even if my family is destroyed. After all, it's easy to be a bull, but it also depends on whether you are a horse that covers 1,000 li. If we were to meet iron weights like Luodu and Li Xingyun, who would be able to support such people when they were full? Su Tong nodded to express his understanding. Brother, was that Shang Kao just now? Beishan Kao is a secret skill of his master, and Gao Tianfang actually knows it, but it is a bit specious. After experiencing it carefully, it has a completely different feeling from Beishan Kao. Strictly speaking, it is no longer Beishan Kao. Speaking of this matter, Gao Tianfang was a little proud, but also a little disappointed. It turned out that when Mr. Shui came to their home, he saw him standing on a water tank practicing Hamabu, so he came to the school to test him. The school was quite satisfied with the results, so he gave him some tips. At that time, I also showed him the mountain buckle, saying that it was fate, and it was up to him how much he could understand. Gao Tianfang was indeed up to the mark. He had figured out the outline just by looking at it once. Later, after his improvement, it became his unique skill. It's just that Gao Tianfang only learned a little bit of it after all. He combined Shang Kao with his family's corpse falling evil, and what he came up with was specious. It looked a bit similar, but it didn't work when he encountered Su Tong's orthodoxy. What kind of person is Shui Gui? Although Beishan Kao seems to be using a sinister spell, it is actually an upright Taoist technique. Shui Gui took it from Taoist collections and combined it with the skills of a paper maker to create it. It seems simple, but if you don't know the tricks, it won't work just by scratching the surface. Su Tong himself received the inheritance, and now he has only learned the first prayer. He is still far from being able to knock on the door of the King of Hell with the third prayer like his master. But even so, Gao Tianfang's talent and understanding were indeed amazing, but something unexpected happened and he suddenly became paralyzed in bed for so many years. As a result, the decline of their family was so severe, and coupled with the changes of the times, the business of corpse exterminators has declined to an unbelievable extent. Fortunately, the name of their old man still has some prestige in the borders of western Hunan, so he can barely support it. That is, some time ago, Gao Zhou secretly injected him with a gene-enhancing potion to get him back on his feet. For this matter, Gao Tianfang beat Gao Zhou severely. The medicine that could cure him was not easy even if he thought about it. This kid actually wasted it on himself. It was simply cruel. Gao Zhou also lost his teeth and didn't mention a word about the genetic enhancement potion. In short, this strange father and son are quite ridiculous. Gao Tianfang chatted with Su Tong for more than half an hour, mostly talking about Shui Gui's events back then, with a look of admiration on his face. After all, in that era, he was the one who could convince people from all walks of life. At this time, seeing that it was almost dawn outside, Gao Tianfang yawned and signaled everyone to go to bed early and take Su Tong to visit their scenery in western Hunan tomorrow. Hey, I finally left. Gao Zhou sat down on the chair. When his father was talking just now, he stood by and waited from beginning to end, not to mention that he was suffering a lot. Seeing that my father was finally gone, I became bold. Don't be surprised. My father has this kind of virtue. Times have changed, but he still sticks to the same behavior as before. Gao Zhou apologized to Su Tong with a bitter look on his face. After all, he was here to help. Gao Zhou felt very sorry for being slapped down by his father inexplicably. As for his father's tricks, he obviously doesn't buy it. It's just that his biological father's majesty is still there, and the son really doesn't dare to resist. No, I think it's quite good. It's hard for you to understand what the older generation does, but they have more principles than us and know better what faith is. Su Tong was smoking a hookah, and suddenly his voice changed. He looked at Gao Zhou with a smile, until Gao Zhou was so scared that he smiled and said, "It's okay, we can talk about it from now on. You can control me, call me uncle, and I will call you brother, so we don't interfere with each other. You non-interference. Gao Zhou rolled his eyes. As soon as this matter was mentioned, Gao Zhou felt depressed. He was in his 30s, and he actually called Su Tong, who was more than 10 years younger than him, his uncle. Just when they were about to say something, their expressions perked up at the same time, and they heard a sudden prompt from the prop book. The big script Progress in the Age of Chaos will start in 3 days, please participants be prepared. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 185. After such a long time, the two finally received the reminder from the prop book. They couldn't help but look at each other, but their expressions were completely different. Gao Zhou's heartbeat couldn't help but accelerate. Ever since he promised Su Tong to go to the big script with him, he would pester his father to tell him the stories of those years when he returned home. Forget it if you don't talk about it. Once you talk about it, Gao Zhou murmurs in his heart. According to his father Gao Tianfang, in that era, people like them were jealous of people and gods wherever they went. Not only to hide his abilities, but also to be wary of evil plots. After all, there are too many old monsters left over from Yuan Datu's era. If there is a gust of wind in an era, then this gust of wind is a rare evil wind, crooked wind, and poisonous wind. The transition between the old era and the new era is like the last few bounces of a fish in a frying pan. For example, when Gao Zhou was told a few short stories such as The Man Who Borrowed Knives, The Longevity of His Life, The Bean Soaked in an Iron Pot, Gao Zhou's heart beat faster and faster. Some of these stories were witnessed by Gao Tianfang with his own eyes, and some are still unsolved cases to this day. Among them, the iron pot-soaked beans are the most weird. There is such a case. It is said that a monk came to a town. The monk has an upright appearance and is wearing a cassock. The most exaggerated thing is that he wears a string of rosary beads around his neck that are as big as a baby's fist. As soon as the monk arrived, he sat at the entrance of the town, chanting sutras and meditating every day. He could not drink any water for several days, and occasionally asked people in the town for a bowl of water. As time passed, everyone began to be shocked by the monk. At this time, some people still didn't believe that the monk didn't steal anything. So the monk simply took a small boat and spent more than 10 days in the center of the lake. Now more people believed in the monk, so they asked about the monk's origin. The monk did not say his name. He only said that there was a temple nearby that was dilapidated and he wanted to raise money to repair it. But the monk didn't take any money, so he turned around and left. When people rushed over to take a look, they saw that there was indeed a dilapidated temple. They rushed in and saw that there were only 2 or 3 monks inside. When asked about the eminent monk, none of the monks recognized him. Just when everyone was confused, someone suddenly saw a stone statue of an arhat that looked exactly like that one. Now everyone suddenly realized that this was the appearance of arhat. So people in the town started to raise money for donations. Many people even lost their money and donated money to the temple after hearing the news. As a result, 2 months passed, but there was no movement at the temple. When people looked again, they found that the temple had long been empty, and there was no monk inside. At this time, an old gentleman passing by the town learned about this and revealed the secret to everyone. It turns out that everything was a scam planned long ago, the monks were all fake, and this temple was also the deserted temple they had found long ago. The so-called arhat is naturally a fake. The reason why he can neither eat nor drink is because the rosary beads around his neck are actually made of beef jerky. When he was hungry, he secretly nibbled on a piece of beef jerky. Of course, he didn't need anything else to eat. As soon as the old gentleman said this, everyone realized that they had been deceived. Just when he was angry, the old man grinned and stopped the people who wanted to smash the arhat statue. He drew a circle around the arhat statue, and then borrowed a large iron pot and placed it in front of the stone statue. It is said that everyone is asked to throw the soybeans in and soak them in water, and soon the money they were defrauded will be back. Everyone was hesitant, but they didn't think there was any loss, so they followed it one after another. As a result, within 3 days, the liar turned himself in. When people opened the door, they discovered that the belly of the leading monk was bigger than that of a pregnant woman who was 9 months pregnant and about to give birth. It was said that I had a dream every night. I dreamed that someone was racing beans to me and giving me water. I was obviously very hungry, but I couldn't eat anything. My stomach swelled and became bigger and bigger. As soon as I inquired about it, I found out what happened to the old gentleman, so I hurriedly turned myself in and begged the villagers in the town to take out the beans from the iron pot. But it turned out to be a step too late. Not long after the fake Arhat surrendered, he suddenly died. His death was extremely cruel. According to the forensic doctor, all the internal organs in his stomach were eaten out. People rushed to the temple and found countless rats eating beans. As for the old gentleman, there has been no news for a long time, and it has become an unsolved case ever since. Who is this old gentleman? How did he do that? Even now no one knows the secret. But in that era, such secretive and strange killing techniques emerged in endlessly. The story was not scary, but Gao Zhou felt scared after hearing it. You must know that such big scripts are often modeled on reality. They are so cruel in reality, let alone in scripts. What is completely different from Gao Zhou is that Su Tong is looking forward to it more and more. Even if Gao Zhou tells these stories to him, he has no intention of giving up. But at this time, the space reminder came, and it was useless for Gao Zhou to retreat mentally. The only thing that could make him feel at ease was that he bought a special prop at the exhibition that would allow him to quickly escape from the script space when he was on the verge of death. Of course, the price is also huge. All gains from this script kill will be erased, all script points will be deducted, and a prop card will be randomly drawn from you. This punishment cannot be too harsh, it is enough to severely damage any player's vitality, and even risk losing scenario points in the next scenario kill. But compared to a dog's life, this is still acceptable. Just because of this amulet, Gao Zhou would not have to disband the team. 3 days, whether it is long or short, is still plenty for them. Because they could probably guess the background of the script, the two of them were very targeted in their preparation. Gao Zhou also took out the gun and bullets he bought from the border as if he were offering a treasure. He couldn't buy large caliber weapons, but he could buy 2 Type 95 pistols and 2 large boxes of ammunition. The most important thing is, he also bought a high explosive grenade. With these things, at least he won't feel intimidated if he does it with real swords and guns. Su Tong has also been preparing in a hurry these past 2 days. In addition to the paper man, he also used the star eye tribulation to bless the spirit enchantment. The improved spirit possessing technique finally allowed him to happily bless gold foil. Of course, the probability of success is only about 40%, and the enchantment skill used to be divided into 3 points in the script, but now it requires 5 points after upgrading. Coupled with the binding cost of the star eye tribulation, Su Tong only made a little golden man of less than 3 inches and cried out that he couldn't stand it. This is simply a money-burning hole. Just such a 3-inch golden man can burn nearly 300 script points from him. It is equivalent to resurrecting a big fat person. Add these two together, and he has lost 600 script points before he has entered the script space. If he hadn't gained enough script points from the last script world, he really wouldn't have dared to squander it like this. Hey, this gadget is quite unique. Gao Zhou looked at the completed statuette on the table and couldn't help but feel amused. He couldn't help but fiddle with it with his fingers. As a result, as soon as he touched it, his finger was cut open by the edges of the paper figure. Don't touch it, this is not a work of art, it is a murder prop. Su Tong was lying on the sofa, and with a slight flick of his finger, he suddenly saw the paper man flying into the air, like a cannonball, and pierced into the beam above his head. Then, under his control, he slowly crawled out and opened a deep crack in the wall with his two small hands. This little guy may seem inconspicuous, but after being blessed with spiritual enchantment, his lethality is extremely fierce. Because it was too small, Su Tong deliberately made it full of sharp edges and corners. Coupled with his ability to control paper figures, he is enough to cause great damage to the enemy when the opportunity is right. In addition, if Big Fatty is concerned, he is confident that even without moving his two main powers, Demon Power and Ember, he can kill people with just one move. Coupled with Bashenko, even the so-called Voldemort in Gao Zhou's mouth is not at all timid. Boom, boom, boom. At this time there was a knock on the door. Gao Zhou opened the door a crack and looked out. His face suddenly became unhappy. "Didn't I tell you not to bother me here if you have nothing to do?" Su Tong glanced sideways and saw an old lady wearing by-clothes outside the door. Judging from her hair, she looks like she is in her early 80s. She was seen holding a thermos flask. She ignored Gao Zhou's displeased look and handed the thermos flask over with a smile. "It's getting cold, so I've made mushroom soup for you. You can drink it while it's hot." Gao Zhou looked at the thermos pot, his face softened slightly, but his tone was still cold. "I know." After saying "I understand," he took the thermos bottle and closed the door tightly without giving the old lady a chance to say a second sentence. Although Su Tong was surprised by Gao Zhou's unusual behavior, it was a family matter and it was inconvenient for him to ask, so he didn't worry about it. The old lady was not angry at all. She turned around and walked out with small steps. She didn't have a room in the Gao family. The only room she had was a broken house not far from the door of the Gao family. It used to be a horse stable, so she moved in after cleaning it up. "I just got home and opened the door. The room was dark, and I could vaguely see a bed and a small table. There wasn't even any decent furniture. The only thing that could be called valuable was the mahogany dressing table in the corner." The old lady turned on the small lamp on the table, and the room lit up slightly. He sat in front of the dressing table and looked at his white hair. He didn't know what he was thinking. A faint smile slowly appeared on his face. It was as if he was reminiscing about something beautiful. After thinking about it, he suddenly took a breath and said, "There are two most uncomfortable things in the world. The tree wants to be quiet but the wind does not stop, and the child wants to be raised but cannot be loved." As soon as he finished speaking, a shadow suddenly rushed out from the shadows and put a knife to the old lady's back. Under the dim light, the shadow gradually revealed its appearance, but it was not a living person, but a puppet. "It's been so many years. Is that old monster from Fenglelu still alive? Times have changed now. It's great to live peacefully, so why bother?" Poof. Before the old lady finished speaking, the puppet thrust the knife forward. However, when the blade penetrated, it seemed as if it was stuck inside and could not move. Not only that, but the old lady's head slowly turned from the front, with a sneer on her face. The Cai family is getting worse and worse. Back then, Narcissus's skills were astonishing, but now the descendants can only do such shabby things. As he spoke, the puppet suddenly softened and fell to the ground with a crash. Then a scream was heard from outside the door. When the door opened again, a burly man walked in carrying a corpse. He bowed down respectfully and whispered, "A total of 7 people came to Fenglei Tower, 3 died, and the rest ran away." Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 186. Dingling. "Welcome." The familiar voice made Su Tong smile. He glanced sideways and saw that familiar face under the yellowish light, with delicate facial features and big eyes twinkling under the curved willow leaf eyebrows, staring at him. There was a bit of expectation and nervousness in his indifferent eyes. Su Tong glanced over, and 4 words popped into his mind: if you want to reject it, welcome it. With his eyebrows raised slightly and his eyes narrowed, he stood behind Gaozhou, winking and teasing. Facing Su Tong's teasing, the young lady's face was expressionless, but her fingers under the bar made a crackling sound. Hello, we have reserved a big script before. Gao Zhou naturally did not realize the subtle changes between the two people's eyebrows, and intervened in the middle without any sense, interrupting the communication between the two people's eyes. There's a black door on the left, just push it open and go in. The cold response made Gao Zhou feel a little embarrassed. But I don't think it's a big deal. After all, the front desk is not something ordinary players like them can afford to offend. There used to be a player who didn't know how to live or die. He thought he was good, but he was so bold that he wanted to tease the front desk. The result was such a tragic death that it was said that not even the bones were left. So whether he is the front desk or the host, Gao Zhou's attitude is to keep a respectful distance. Yes, hide as far away as possible. However, Gao Zhou had just taken 2 steps when he realized that Su Tong had not followed him. When he looked back, he almost stared out of his eyes. Gao Zhou suddenly rubbed his teeth when he saw Su Tong lying on the bar, holding his chin with his hands, and squinting at the aloof lady at the bar with a mean expression. This guy. Gao Zhou's expression suddenly changed, and he was about to step forward and pull Su Tong away. I saw Su Tong actually took her little hand and put the polypoma that had not been identified before in her palm. You promised me last time that if I came back alive, you would accompany me to heat the hot pot. Humph, that's a good idea. She smiled, picked up the hammer from under the table and hit it hard on the prop card, then handed it to Su Tong. It's done. Seeing the prop card being handed over, Su Tong stretched out his hand to take the prop card, and at the same time, he gently pressed it into her palm without leaving any trace. Suddenly, a strange feeling like a cat scratching came over her, making her face turn red. When she pulled her hand back, a small paper crane appeared in her hand. Then when you come back this time, I will take you to the hot springs. As he spoke, Su Tong glanced at her chest. Well, the little lotus has just revealed its sharp horns, and a dragonfly has already stood on it. Sensing Su Tong's eyes, the young lady snorted coldly and turned around. But then he turned around and reminded, although you initiated the mission script, others still have the authority to join at any time. Gao Zhou and Su Tong couldn't help but shout after hearing this. They are both smart people. It's a reminder that someone could step into their script at any moment, maybe even to pick the peach at some crucial moment. Gao Zhou wanted to ask more clearly, but the young lady pointed at the time. Go in, the time is almost up. In fact, there were still 5 minutes left, but she obviously didn't intend to say any more, as if she was circumventing some kind of rule. Seeing this, Su Tong had no choice but to pull Gao Zhou back. Every 2 steps he took, Su Tong suddenly remembered something and turned around to look at her eagerly, his expression gradually becoming serious. Seeing his serious expression, the young lady frowned slightly and her heart tightened. After a while, I heard Su Tong say, remember to buy a swimsuit, a tight-fitting one. She was stunned for a moment, then smiled and cursed angrily, bah, I didn't promise you. But Su Tong didn't care about this, pretending not to hear, and pulled Gao Zhou, who was still at a loss, to go inside. Looking at this guy's disappearing figure, she pouted and muttered to herself, nervous. As he spoke, he glanced at the paper crane in his hand again. After hesitating for a moment, he took out his phone and entered the word swimsuit in the search bar on a certain app. The hall was empty with no other players entering. There were 4 doors, except for the one that usually entered the script world. There are 3 more portals, and a red door with a grimace on it leads to the exhibition. The other side is the black portal they want to enter. As for what's inside that white door? No one knows, at least with the qualifications of the 2 of them, they are obviously not qualified enough to understand the mystery. Looking at the black door in front of him, Gao Zhou swallowed nervously, calmed down, and stretched out his hand to push the door open. A black corridor appeared in front of the two people. Stepping into the corridor, the faint light in front of me could only make out the outline of the corridor in front of me. Without a host to lead the way, it always feels like something is missing. Although Su Tong doesn't like the host, I have to say that the host's figure is really eye-catching. When the two reached the end of the tunnel, only two small doors appeared in front of them. One white and one black, seems to be hinting at something. After the two looked at each other, Gao Zhou took the initiative to choose Black Gate without any discussion. If this had something to do with identity, it would be easier for him as a veteran gangster Gao Zhou to be in the underworld. We may not be together after entering. Please be careful in everything. Remember our password. Gao Zhou pointed to his cuffs. I saw that his cuffs seemed to be stained by ink, stained with a few faint blue dyes. He also has such a mark. It is a special prop that can only be seen by his teammates. Su Tong nodded, be careful in everything. If you have to, disband the team and leave quickly. After Gao Zhou reassured him, he pushed open the black door in front of him and walked in. As soon as I entered the door, I saw a shrine placed in the dark room. The weak candlelight on both sides of the shrine made the statues enshrined in the shrine appear particularly blurry. He took a deep breath. As a senior player, he already had rich experience in the routines before entering the script world. But just when he relaxed and prepared to see who was enshrined in the shrine, suddenly the candlelight in front of him dimmed, and Gao Zhou's heart skipped a beat. When I wanted to take a closer look, I realized that the shrine was empty. Huh. Just now I clearly saw a statue of a god inside. Why is it gone? He walked up and took a closer look, confirming that there was nothing in the shrine. Just when I was feeling strange, I suddenly heard a deep, strange laughter. He followed the sound and looked up, only to see a green-faced and fanged Buddha head looking down at him, with two red eyes like two red lanterns. Gao Zhou's scalp tightened. Seeing the Buddha's head getting closer and closer, he subconsciously wanted to run out. But just as he was about to move, a huge finger fell down. The next second, Gao Zhou was shattered into pieces and plunged into deep darkness. On the other side, Su Tong opened his eyes. It was raining outside the door, a cool breeze blew, and there was an earthy smell in the air. In the dim room, only an oil lamp barely illuminated the room in front of him. In addition to the neatly arranged files in the room, white coats and blue police hats hung on the hangers in the corner. The black suitcase and camera were neatly placed on the table. An autopsy diagram of a corpse was placed in front of him. Judging from the photos, the internal organs of the corpse have been charred, but the strange thing is that the exterior of the corpse is intact. Opening the document on the side, a page of archival paper fell off the table. He picked it up and took a look. The content above was his appointment notice. Looking at this notice, some memory fragments suddenly appeared in Su Tong's mind. The person he plays now is called Zhao Jian. He originally worked as a forensic expert at the provincial police department, with good remuneration and benefits. In addition, his family is engaged in police work. With this relationship, his future is expected to be good. But Zhao Jian is a very stubborn person and always insists on a case that there is something wrong with it. As a result, he was transferred to City L as a forensic doctor. Although he was professionally qualified, it was equivalent to being relegated to the cold palace. Generally speaking, professional forensic doctors have very little promotion potential, and some people remain forensic doctors throughout their lives. Moreover, this job is particularly difficult to do. The dirty and tiring work is all done by forensic doctors. Other police officers only need to go to the scene to take photos and extract evidence. Basically, forensic scientists are responsible for moving the bodies, dissecting them, sorting them out, etc. All year round, the dead smell on my body cannot be washed away even with soap. If you want to find a girlfriend, it's basically impossible to find a girlfriend as soon as you listen to forensic medicine. After all, if you think about the hands touching corpses and touching them every day, I believe few women can bear it. The salary and benefits are not much different from those of ordinary civil servants. Therefore, even those who study forensic medicine often do not engage in this profession. As for the professional tools in TV dramas, just take a look. Basically, they are rarely fully equipped for you. The family originally wanted to use their connections to get him out, but he was not willing to do so. He had a bad temper, and no one could say anything to help him. They used forensic medicine as a forensic medicine, and it was easier to deal with corpses than with people. Finally, I took a look at the date when the appointment letter was signed. July 13, 1968. Su Tong held his chin with his fingers and couldn't help but think about it. It will still be some time before this world meets Master. It is estimated that Master has not come to L City at this time. This status is good, official status, equivalent to a protective umbrella. But there are limitations. After all, with such an identity, many things are not very convenient to do. In particular, it is easy to trigger the repulsion effect. After thinking about it, overall the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. I just don't know who Gao Zhou is. Before he could get used to the unfamiliar environment in front of him, he heard a knock on the door. A police officer opened the door, stuck his head out and shouted to him, "Brother Zhao, hurry up, there is a case in the eastern suburbs, the boss asked us to get there quickly." Su Tong nodded, "Oh," then stood up, put on his white coat, picked up the toolbox on the table and walked out. Riding on a dilapidated jeep that was almost falling apart, the car sounded the alarm and rolled up eroded mud along the way, swaying toward the eastern suburbs. Then he took the opportunity to look out the car window. The short tile-roofed houses and the bumpy gravel roads looked like a fifth-tier countryside. It was completely different from the L City in his impression. It is hard to imagine that L City, the ancient capital of the 9 dynasties, would look like this in this era. The car came to the eastern suburbs and came to a bush despite the heavy rain outside. Su Tong opened the bush and took a look. I saw the body of a middle-aged man kneeling on the ground, squeezing the flower with both hands and hitting his head on the ground. Large and small corpse spots have appeared on the gray-white skin. Su Tong walked forward with the box and took a closer look. He found that the man's abdominal cavity had been cut open. What was even weirder was that there was actually a Buddha's head stuffed inside. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 187. Ritual Killing. Su Tong put on his gloves and carefully tried to take out the Buddha head. The Buddha's head is not big, as if it has been stuffed in roughly. When he took out the Buddha's head, the intestines and liver suddenly flowed out from the abdomen. Su Tong didn't look at the intestines and liver, but took the Buddha head in his hand and looked at it carefully. Hi. It's really high. He carefully examined the Buddha's head and couldn't help but praise it secretly. Because Mr. Song asked him to look at the Buddha statues to enhance his knowledge of the expressions of the paper figures. In particular, we should study the openings of the Buddha's eyes, corners of his lips, face, ears, nose, mouth, etc. So in this regard, he worked hard to study a large amount of information. It is no exaggeration to say that even if the Buddha head in front of you is not an antique, its craftsmanship is beyond the reach of ordinary people. Just talking about this facial expression, it would not be so perfect without 10 years of experience. It's really surprising that such a piece of art is stuffed into this guy's stomach. Xiao Zhao. At this time, several people wearing green police uniforms came over. Su Tong took a look, and basic information about several people appeared in his mind. The leader is Ni Wenchao, followed by He Ya, Li Nan, Yang Giguo, and Chen Jian. They are all capable officers of the local police force and have solved many major cases. You must know that in this era of scarcity, the efficiency of solving crimes is extremely low, and the detection methods are naturally, not to mention. As the only forensic examiner in the police force, how much information he can obtain is undoubtedly crucial to them and directly affects the case detection rate. Before the captain could speak, Su Tong gave him the Buddha head in his hand. Let's look for it. Most people can't make this thing. I need to take the rest back for further analysis. He was afraid that the captains would miss the details, so he went out of his way to tell all the details about the Buddha head. That's it? I didn't expect that there are so many opinions about such inconspicuous things. Xiao Zhao is indeed from the province. He is well informed, but it's different. Ni Wenchao clapped his hands and praised. You're showing off. Chen Jian stood behind him and was very unhappy with Su Tong's attitude of pointing out the country. Upon hearing this, Ni Wenchao turned around and glared at Chen Jian fiercely, then turned around and said with a smile, "Ignore him, you mud-legged guy, he knows a lot about football." When Su Tong heard this, he looked like he suddenly understood. He looked at Chen Jian with disdain and curled his lips. Then let's go like this. You guys first find the source of this Buddha head, and then I'll see if there are any other clues. Oh, you kid slapped your nose in your face. Believe it or not, I will beat you up. Chen Jian's face darkened. How could he, who was known as the Black King Kong, bear this? He was about to come over to Su Tong and teach this pretty boy a lesson. Chen Jian. He Ya on the side quickly grabbed him. Don't make trouble. You. Chen Jian obviously had a crush on He Ya, but when He Ya pulled him away, he blushed. He. Seeing this, Su Tong couldn't help but mocked, "You're blushing now. It seems that you are not only a mud-legged child, but also a baby who has never had breast milk." After saying that, he did not forget to say to He Ya, "Auntie, be careful, don't let your naughty kid run out, I have a bad temper, be careful I kick him into the toilet." After some ridicule, not to mention Chen Jian, He Ya was so angry that her eyes flashed coldly. She was almost the same age as him, and yet she was called aunt. How could she bear this? Why do you have such a bad mouth? Now Li Nan and Yang Giguo were also annoyed. They knew that this guy was transferred from the province, but those who didn't know better thought he was the newly appointed director. Seeing that Su Tong was immediately outraged, Ni Wenchao hurriedly showed off his official authority as captain. "Stop arguing, this is the scene of a case, not a place for you to quarrel and bicker. Xiao Zhao, take the body back and check it again to see if there are any other clues." After Ni Wenchao finished speaking, Su Tong received a prompt from the prop book. Side Mission 1, Buddha Head Murder Case. Task Tip, this may not be the beginning, but it is certainly not the end. Mission Requirements, assist in solving the Buddha Head murder case. After receiving the task prompt, Su Tong nodded towards Ni Wenchao to express his understanding. This attitude made Ni Wenchao very satisfied. He turned around and glared at Li Nan and others. "Li Nan, He Ya, you go check the Buddha's head. Chen Jian, you go check this person's identity. Come back to the country and follow me. Check the area nearby. See if there are any other clues." Ni Wenchao also returned from the army and still had prestige. With many years of experience in handling cases, he distributed tasks in an orderly manner. Su Tong pouted, rolled his eyes at Chen Jian, turned around and left. The proud look made Chen Jian stomp his feet angrily. After he left, he began to complain to Ni Wenchao, cursing, "Captain, isn't he just transferred from the province? What's his air? He was demoted to forensic medicine. He thought he could be promoted. Chen Jian looked resentful and wanted to press this guy to the ground and rub him. But N. Iwancheo waved his hand and not only did not take this matter to heart, but explained, "Don't work with emotions. In addition, Xiao Zhao will inevitably be resentful when he is demoted. Besides, what they said is very reasonable. A Buddha head can see that there are so many details, which shows that he is still capable." In fact, N. Iwancheo was half right. The other half is entirely the character set by Su Tong himself. A venomous mouth, an arrogant heart, and low emotional intelligence, this is exactly what he needs. As Zhao Jian himself said, dealing with living people is too tiring, so it is better to deal with corpses. I just wanted to make this kid's character more exaggerated. This saves unnecessary social time and allows you to focus more on the movements in the direction of the master. The body was brought back to the autopsy room. Su Tong studied it carefully and found that there were traces of blunt force blows on the back of the man's head. This further confirms that this was a homicide and not the Jianghu method as originally imagined. As for why it is done like this, it may be to interfere with the police's sight, or it may have some special meaning. The specific judgment will have to wait until N. Iwancheo and others come back, and then make a judgment based on the information they have. After determining the cause of the guy's death, Su Tong took off his clothes and threw the disposable gloves into the trash can. Sit on a chair and start reviewing again. According to the reminder from the lady at the front desk, although this script was initiated by them, other players may join in the process. How did the other party join in? Was it accidental or intentional? Is it a team or an individual? He could not confirm these issues for the time being, so it was very necessary to maintain his identity as a forensic doctor. Then he summoned the prop book and looked at the newly identified prop card. Polypoma. A strange mass of sarcoma. Passive skill 1, blood nourishment. The holder can obtain a special body after feeding it with donated blood. Passive skill 2, frame the blame, needs to complete blood raising. When you suffer a certain lock-on attack, you can summon your physical body as a substitute. But if the physical body is destroyed, you may be attacked by the physical body's evil spirits. At the same time, this prop card is damaged and cannot be used, and it permanently occupies a slot in your prop book. Note, occupied slots can be released by using yellow spring water. No wonder. Seeing the information on this prop card, he was immediately relieved. No wonder the host had to pay 3 times the price before appraising it. It turns out that this is a special prop card, somewhat similar to the substitution technique. But it's more flexible than the substitute technique, and the cost is acceptable. In this big script world full of weird and evil magic, there is no doubt that this prop card has an extremely high cost performance. There's no telling if it can save your life at a critical moment. Putting the prop book away, Su Tong was about to get up and leave to see if he could contact Gao Zhou. Suddenly, the corpse beside him jumped a few times, and then he sat up straight, stretched out his hand and grabbed Su Tong. "Give me my life." The sudden change surprised him, and his body reacted quickly. He turned sideways to avoid the corpse's hand and slapped the corpse on the face. With this slap, the body immediately flew straight out and hit the glass door. Bang, there was an explosion, and the glass door instantly shattered into pieces. Fake corpse. Looking at the body that got up again, he made a suspicious guess, but then denied this possibility. Under the guidance of Mr. Song, he was no longer the Amon he used to be. He used scientific explanations to explain that the cause of the corpse fraud was static electricity. An unscientific explanation is that the soul has not yet left the body. Under the stimulation of some external object, part of the soul unconsciously controls the body. But the guy in front of him has been disemboweled and has been dead for at least more than a day. His soul should have left his body long ago. Besides, the corpse fraud is an unconscious action, so how can he still speak? Just when he was confused, the corpse looked at Su Tong blankly, and then rubbed his face. He actually turned around and started to run out the door. He even understood the principle of running away if he couldn't be beaten. Now he was even more sure that this guy was not just a fake corpse. He immediately picked up the stool and hit it on the guy's back. Under Su Tong's huge strength, the stool exploded on the guy's back like a cannonball, knocking him to the ground. Su Tong stepped on it and took out the demon bell at the same time. The bell swung and the clear ringing sound immediately made the body twitch. There is indeed a ghost. Seeing this, he was even more sure of what he was thinking. The demon bell was the nemesis of ghosts and had little effect on zombies and walking dead. The reason why humans use flesh as a boat is because their flesh and blood is protected by a life aura. But the corpse has no life aura, so there is no way to protect the soul. This guy was twitching so violently, so there was obviously something seriously wrong. Just when I was about to ask where this guy came from. Bang! The door in front of him was pushed open, and Iwan Chao walked in with someone, asking him if he had made any new discoveries. But they saw Su Tong actually stepping on the corpse's head and grabbing the corpse's arm with one hand. For a moment, everyone looked at each other. When Su Tong looked at the corpse, it was already gone. He shook the arm of the corpse helplessly and said, "If I said he wanted to attack the police, would you believe it? Sorry, I've made a lot of typos recently. It's because I'm away from home and it's inconvenient to type on my laptop. So I switched to using my mobile phone to type. Although it's convenient to type on my phone, the screen is too small. Sometimes my typing will be messed up accidentally. If you find it, please mark it. I will modify it as soon as possible." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shuigan Xiao. Chapter 188. The deceased, Guo Jinhua, male, 56 years old, a villager in Yangchuan, unemployed. Guo's wife said that he went out for a drink 2 days ago and never came back. Because Guo was idle and often drank and played cards, he occasionally did not work for a few days. It's common to go home, so Guo's wife doesn't take it to heart. Just yesterday, his body was found by the river. All his clothes were stripped off and his body was disemboweled. After inspection, Chen Jian said this, glanced sideways at Su Tong, and suppressed a smile. Then he continued. After examination, it was found that Guo Jinhua suffered fatal injuries from a blunt instrument blow to the back of his head. He should have been beaten to death before his chest was cut open and a brand new Buddha head was put in. Strangely, it was Guo Jinhua's the heart is missing. In the office, Chen Jian simply reported back the information he had investigated. Iwan Chao nodded, lit a loose flower for himself, and looked at He Yat and Li Nan, who were responsible for investigating the Buddha's head. "We are currently investigating the Buddha's head. We have visited several stone carving workshops, but have found nothing yet." Li Nan briefly reported the information about the Buddha head. "There are not many stone carving factories, but it is obviously not that easy to find the origin of the Buddha's head in them. According to our investigation, Guo Jinhua has a very bad reputation in the village. He is idle and likes drinking and gambling. He was once administratively detained for a period of time because of a fight. People in the village hate and fear him. I think the direction of the investigation can be focused on the direction of vendetta." Yang Giguo's thinking was very clear. He listed several families who had a bad relationship with Guo Jinhua and prepared to focus on the next step of investigation. "Wait a minute, I still think we should focus on investigating the Buddha's head. Most of the stones in the stone carving factory are processed, and they can only be regarded as ordinary stonemasons. Personally, I prefer ritual killings." At this time, Su Tong, who was sitting behind the desk, interrupted Yang Giguo, "I think you can go to a nearby temple to find out. There are dedicated masons responsible for repairing Buddha statues in temples. These people focus on Buddha statues, and the scope of investigation can be narrowed further. Haha, Chen Ji unclasped his arms and sneered, I think you are frightened by corpses? Can corpses attack the police? Can you think of a better reason? As soon as Chen Jian said this, the expressions on everyone's faces became weird. They obviously regarded Su Tong's previous words as a joke. Seeing this, Su Tong's face turned red and he stood up suddenly. His piercing eyes stared at Wenchao. Captain, I applied to participate in the investigation of this case. I must investigate this matter to the end. Ahem. Wenchao coughed twice and awkwardly waved his hand to Su Tong to sit down first before talking. He was about to find an excuse to excuse himself, but he heard Su Tong continue. I know you may think my statement is too ridiculous, but that's why I should investigate clearly. I'm not out of anger, but because. Su Tong said as he glanced at the badge on his shoulder, his deep eyes flashing with the flame of faith, as long as I wear this clothes, I will be worthy of the responsibility on my shoulders. Every word he spoke was sonorous and powerful, and he was as firm as a nail. Even though Chen Jian and the others looked down on this little forensic doctor who was transferred from the provincial capital, when they heard this sentence, they still couldn't help but moved. But Chen Jian was still unconvinced and said, Tisk, it really came down from above. The scene was so beautiful. Chen Jian. Wenchao frowned and glanced at him, signaling Chen Jian to shut up, and then nodded, okay, you can follow the investigation team from today on. Li Nan, follow him to investigate the nearby temples. No. Unexpectedly, Su Tong turned his eyes and looked at Chen Jian, who was looking unconvinced, and said, I hope to investigate with Chen Jian as a team. Hey, Chen Jian, who was sitting aside, immediately touched his stubble when he heard the words, and glanced at Su Tong with his playful eyes, are you in a group with me? Haha, as he said this, he clasped his hands in his fists, and the bones he pinched made a rattling sound. The threat is self-evident. Now even Wenchao began to feel embarrassed, frowning, and asked, why does it have to be Chen Jian? Su Tong glanced at Chen Jian, and a smile appeared on his angular face, because, I specialize in treating all kinds of dissatisfaction. After the meeting, everyone quickly began to investigate separately. When Li Nan saw that everyone had left, he turned around and complained to Wenchao, Captain, you take too much care of the new kid. Isn't it because of their family background? If not. Wenchao admitted it generously, what can I do about the 3 phone calls last night? Besides, this guy has a pretty clear mind. Let's try it. If he gets lucky and gets a big hit, he should just get out and leave early. Is it better? Buzzing. It was still raining outside, and pedestrians were hiding under the bridge with their bicycles, waiting for the rain to pass. A police van drove past quickly under the gaze of everyone. Several people in the car said nothing, and the atmosphere was particularly awkward. Su Tong tilted his neck and looked at the rain outside in trance. In fact, he didn't have much interest in the side mission, and he even had an indifferent attitude. But the corpse actually came back to life, which made him realize that this case seemed not as simple as he thought. It was precisely because of this that he wanted to see what the case was about. As for why I chose Chen Jian, hey, I'll find out later. There are many temples in L City, but there is probably only one temple that really makes everyone think of it when it is mentioned, and this one is located in the east of L City, not far from the crime scene. After the car stopped, Chen Jian and Su Tong got out of the car first, while Li Nan and the others went to Yangzhuang for in-depth investigation. Looking at the signboard of the White Horse Temple in front of him, Su Tong couldn't help but sigh. The White Horse Temple in reality is much neater and cleaner than it is now. The door of the temple has been cracked several times, and the 2 of them don't need to go through the main entrance because the wall on the side has collapsed, so they can just walk in. As soon as you enter, you will see the tall and straight ancient trees in the Zen forest in front of you, but what echoes them is the dilapidated Buddhist hall of the temple. Fragments of Buddha statues can be seen on the ground and in the corners, and the pagoda has been directly knocked down. Pity. He looked at the Buddha statue in front of him and couldn't help but sigh, these are all precious art treasures, and they were destroyed like this. It's such a pity. They are all broken stones. It's better to smash them so as not to lie to others, Chen Jian said nonchalantly. Su Tong ignored his sigh. They were not here for tourism anyway. When Chen Jian saw Su Tong leaving immediately, he couldn't help but curled his lips. Hey, boy, do you really think I came out with you to give you face? Believe it or not, I will beat you up now. Chen Jian rolled up his sleeves as he spoke, wanting to teach Su Tong a lesson. But Su Tong didn't look at him at all. Just as he was about to continue walking back, he heard a sudden sound of sweeping the floor behind him. When he looked back, he saw a monk wearing a shabby linen robe who didn't know when he appeared outside the hall. I saw the monk sweeping the floor and saying, Amitabha, among all living beings, those who are awake are like phoenix feathers and horns, and those who are confused are like crucian carp crossing the river. The depth of the Buddha's teachings is endless, and although the evil in the teachings is ignorant, it is still astray. A means of solace for one's soul. Huh? Is there really a monk? Chen Jian didn't expect that a monk would dare to stay here in this shabby temple. He stepped forward and showed his police ID. Monk, let me ask you, is this Buddha head lost here? No wonder Chen Jian would ask this. As soon as he entered the door, he saw Buddha heads everywhere on the ground. The key to the Buddha head murder case happened to be on the Buddha heads. Naturally, this idiot thought that the Buddha heads might come from here. As a result, the monk didn't even look at him, he just lowered his head and swept the floor. Seeing that the monk ignored him, Chen Jian immediately became angry. Just as he was about to reach out to grab the monk's clothes, he was suddenly kicked from behind. Chen Jian was unprepared and was thrown to the ground. Before he could get up, Su Tong struck Chen Jian with another blow, knocking him unconscious. Seeing Su Tong's vigorous and resolute methods, the monk couldn't help but be a little surprised. It seemed that he did not expect that the police officer would attack his colleagues directly. Master, don't be surprised. This fool is thick-skinned and thick-skinned. Let him sleep to avoid violating the Dharma. As he spoke, he stepped forward and clasped his hands in his arms. There are 8 shops on the crossroads, 7 of which are leaking and covered with paper. The juniors have changed the door and the juniors have rashly come to the door. Please don't blame me, master. Huh? The monk was startled, then suddenly realized. He clasped his hands towards Su Tong and praised, Amitabha, the small one is hidden in the mountains, the middle one is hidden in the market, the big one is hidden in the court, the benefactor is the wise man, and the poor monk admires him. Su Tong's face remained calm, but his heart was empty. His identity was given to him by the script, so where did he get his great wisdom? Of course, if people say this, you should just accept it politely. You are a guest, so you might as well go to the Buddhist hall to talk. The monk said as he waved his hand on the broom, and saw a breeze coming in. Fallen leaves were flying in front of his eyes, raindrops were hanging upside down, and he actually swept a clean path for himself. These methods made him nervous. It was when he was surprised that he heard the monk laugh and said, Bodhi has no tree, and the mirror is not a stand. There is nothing in the first place, so how can it be stained with dust? As he said this, he asked him to go inside. As for what to do with Chen Jian on the ground, he is Su Tong's tool to gain favor, and it doesn't matter if he is miserable. But he didn't care about Chen Jian, but the monk had to look at Chen Jian. It was still raining lightly, and it was not good to lie on the ground and catch a cold. The monk didn't see any tricks, he just fiddled with the broom in his hand, and immediately the thick leaves around him covered Chen Jian tightly. Su Tong followed the monk into the Buddhist hall. He saw that the Buddhist hall was very simple, with a small Buddha statue, a table, and a bed. The old monk poured him a cup of hot water. After the two sat down, Su Tong straight to the point told the story. The old monk looked at the photo of the Buddha's head. After carefully identifying it, he couldn't help but frown. He took a careful look at Su Tong, who was drinking water, and said seriously, "There used to be craftsmen who specialized in temple repairs, but now these craftsmen have been dismissed. However, if you are looking for them, there are several craftsmen living nearby. You might as well go look for them." Su Tong calmly took a sip of tea. He observed the old monk's expression when he saw the photo, and knew that the old monk must know something. When he heard what he said, he immediately concluded that the old monk had not finished what he said. However, he was not in a hurry to ask. Instead, he looked around and said, "Master, the temple is in such a dilapidated state. Doesn't it feel distressing, Master?" Hearing this, the old monk, instead of being angry that the temple was destroyed, laughed. It was a good job. Su Tong looked at him and saw that the old monk's eyes were clear, and he was definitely not deliberately telling lies to deal with him. I just heard him smile and say, "The dregs of the old era, the Buddha is still extinct, so what if a bunch of broken stones smash it?" This time it was Su Tong's turn to be stunned. He originally wanted to use this remark to trick the old monk, but he didn't expect that the old monk would have this attitude. Seeing that he remained silent, the old monk clasped his hands together and said, "Smash the reality Buddha and get rid of the demons in your heart. This is the Dharma. Smash the Buddha of reality and get rid of the demons in your heart." He lowered his head and repeated these words in his mind. Suddenly, his mind suddenly became enlightened. When he looked at the old monk again, his expression suddenly became awe-inspiring. The next chapter will be posted as soon as it is revised and corrected. Please wait a moment.